I was at my friend's old house, since my friend and I were sitting in the attic just hanging out. My back was pressed up against a secret door that led to a secret room that my friend used for storage, when all of a sudden something hit the door 3 times super hard, and I felt it on my back, so I jumped and opened the door and looked inside, thinking it was my friend, but there was nothing, so I laughed it off. My friend and I thought it must have come from upstairs, and as I began to close the door and turn the latch that locked the door, something hit the door so hard it broke the latch completely and the door swung open, and there was nothing there. But I distinctly remember a strong smell of musty potatoes. The same house on another day. Me and my friend for some reason decide to move his couch and TV into the fireplace room underneath the secret room to play some PlayStation. We couldn't get the TV to work, so we said, screw it, let's go get some cheeseburgers from down the street, and then we'll come back to get it working. When we arrived back, the door was closed, and something was holding it shut. There was no lock, but the door was latched, and we couldn't open it. So I went outside and around the house to climb in the window of that room. I looked into the window and saw that the couch was on its side and pushed up against the inside of the door, along with some boxes so that it was held shut. I remember feeling goosebumps when I saw it. Anyway, I opened the window, and as soon as I stuck my head through the window, something said really loud and in my face, "Get out!" It was almost like I could feel its breath, and it had the same musty potato smell from the previous experience. I've never felt such terror in my life, and afterwards told my friend's dad. He casually said to us, "Yeah, the ghost doesn't like it when we go into that room much, so stay out." It was bloody freaky to say the least. This happened to my parents. My mum going off the deep end on Crazy Train isn't that out of character, but my dad doesn't do that ever, and he swears by this story. When I was around 2, my mum woke up from a nightmare, and she woke up my dad. He tried going back to sleep, but she told him not to, because his mother was about to call him, because a friend of theirs had been decapitated in some kind of accident. My dad, of course, thought this was nonsense, but my mum was in hysterics over it and couldn't sleep. Sure enough, a few minutes later the phone rang. It was his mum, letting him know that his friend and the friend's little brother's girlfriend had both died in a car crash coming home from a party about 3 miles away from us. My dad's mum and their family were very close, and my grandma, my dad's mum, and the mother from that family were lifelong friends, and she had just died 6 months or so. Anyway, we later learned that my dad's friend had been decapitated when he lost control in his ragtop Camaro, hit a tree, flipped the car upside down, and slid a ways on down the road. Neither he nor his younger brother's girlfriend were wearing seatbelts. This would have been back in 1981. My father-in-law hunts on my family's lake house. He had been going to summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee since he was a little kid. Every summer, same camp. Him and his brothers his whole life. In the 80s, the camp closed down and then sold off as lots on the island where the camp was to former campers. My father-in-law bought one of the properties and started bringing his own children there every summer. Fast forward 30 years, I marry his eldest daughter and start going up to the lake every weekend with my wife and her family. Unfortunately, after a few years of this, my father-in-law succumbed to leukemia and was no longer with us. Or so everyone thought. Every summer since he had passed, I have had at least one unexplainable incident happen to me up at the lake house. It usually happens the weekends we open up our lake house for the summer or the weekend that we close down for the winter. There is often an incident when we have a lot of family come for visits too. The first time I noticed something was amiss was the first summer we opened camp after he'd passed away. As I am the eldest male in the family now, it's typically my job to do all the heavy lifting. I was unloading our boatload of supplies on the dock with a little wagon that I used to haul all of my wife's stuff from the boat to the house. I carefully stacked all of our stuff in a pyramid-like shape so that when I pulled the wagon, nothing would wiggle loose and fall off. After 3 trips from the boat to the wagon, I had just one bag left in the boat to grab. As I turned back towards the wagon with the final bag, I froze in my tracks. A brand new rug still rolled up and in plastic wrap that I had buried in our bags on the wagon, so it wouldn't roll off, was now out from under all the stuff I'd piled on top of it and was leaning at a 45-degree angle on the side of the cart, just sitting up in the air. Not anything close to how I'd left it, right there and in front of me. My blood ran cold. As I pulled the wagon towards our house, I called out to my wife, "Your dad says hello." The following day, when I was alone in my brother-in-law's little shack, I was busy setting up furniture and making beds, getting our camp ready for visitors. Suddenly an acorn struck me in the back of the head and then tumbled to the ground. I looked up, wondering if a rodent or something scurried by and knocked it onto me, but there was nothing but the open pitch of the roof above my head. He said hello again, and I ran out of there. The next summer we had a little family reunion of sorts, and my wife's cousins and all their kids came to spend the weekend with us at the lake. One afternoon, I was out back behind the house grilling some lunch for everyone. Everyone else was down at the beach or playing in the water. As I walked through the back door, a balled-up Pikachu bathrobe came flying down the stairs and hit me in the face. In a fury, I pulled the robe off my face and stormed up the stairs, intent on giving whoever did this a good talking to. But there was no one. There was no one else in the house but me. Nobody believed me when I told them what happened. The following summer, when my wife started to believe it, for some reason my wife had been digging around under our cabin, where her mum and dad used to stay before we built the main house, and she found an old set of wrenches that had sunken down in the dirt under the house, probably after many rainstorms. She was washing the old tools off in the sink, and when I came into the kitchen and scoffed, explaining that you don't use water to wash metal tools, you should use WD-40 or something, she told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and to that I respond, "If your father were here, he'd tell you the same thing." To which my wife said, "No, he wouldn't," very confidently. Suddenly a bar stool that was positioned between my wife and I jumped and moved an inch. It didn't slide across the floor or anything, but it certainly hopped slightly. It was noticeable and made a pretty loud thud. My wife and I were both startled, and I said, "See? I told you your dad agrees." From that day on, she stopped questioning me about my encounters with her father. One of my mum's friends bought an old farmhouse about a year back. They have a 3-year-old son. The kid had an imaginary friend called Kevin. He would play with his toys in his room and talk to Kevin. His parents didn't really think anything of it, considering the age of the kid. It got weird after they started listening to their son's conversations with Kevin over the baby monitor. It seemed like something a 3-year-old wouldn't really talk about. The kid was kind of goofy, so they didn't think much of it. They asked the kid about Kevin. He said Kevin is nice. He's a farmer. They figured out that because this kid loved to play with toy tractors and they had just moved to a farmhouse, that was why. But then it got real. There was a shelf mounted on the wall of the kid's room that was about 5 feet off the floor opposite the bed. One morning, the parents go to the kid's room to find one of the stuffed animals that was on the shelf on the kid's bed. They asked him how he got the rabbit. The kid said that Kevin got it for him. A few months pass, and stuff like this happens every now and again. Nothing that couldn't be reasonably explained. Since they moved in, they had found a church in the area and got involved in a Bible study with a few other couples from their church. They decided that they would host a Bible study one day. When they were setting everything up, they gave their address to one of the couples that had lived in town for a while. When they gave their address to the older couple, the wife looked at it and said to her husband, "Hey, isn't this Kevin's old place?" Apparently a man named Kevin used to live there. He ran into some financial troubles and sold most of his land to the neighboring farm, but kept the small patch of land the house was on. He suffered from depression and had a bit of a drinking problem, and eventually hung himself in the house. Their friend from church knew Kevin as it's a small town in Iowa and everyone knows everyone. He found a picture of Kevin and gave it to my mum's friend. The picture was of Kevin and 3 other guys that Kevin would meet with to have coffee and talk about. They showed the picture to the kid, and the kid pointed straight at Kevin without hesitation and said, "It's Kevin!" They moved shortly after. The woods of Rotonga were supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to escape the stress and noise of the city. So when my boyfriend and I decided to go camping there for the weekend, we were looking forward to a relaxing time. We arrived at the park in the early afternoon, and after checking in with the park ranger, we set off on the trail to find the perfect spot for our tent. The woods were quiet and serene, the only sounds the occasional bird call or rustling of leaves in the wind. It was exactly what we needed to unwind. After a short hike, we found a secluded clearing and started setting up camp. My boyfriend was an experienced camper, so we quickly had our tent erected and our sleeping bags unrolled. We gathered firewood and set up a ring of stones for a campfire, planning to cook our dinner over an open flame. As the sun started to dip below the trees, we lit the fire and settled in for the night. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows and talked about our plans for the future. It was a perfect evening, the kind that you remember for years to come. But just as we were drifting off to sleep, we heard a rustling outside our camp. At first we thought it might be a curious animal or a passing hiker. But then we heard the sound of voices, angry, slurred voices that sounded like they belonged to a group of drunk men. My boyfriend tried to calm me down, telling me that they would probably just pass out without incident. But I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We huddled together in our tent, listening as the voices grew louder and louder. And then as they were upon us, a group of 3 men stumbled into our camp, their eyes bloodshot and their breath reeking of alcohol. They were loud and aggressive, demanding to know what we were doing there and why we had set up camp in their territory. My boyfriend tried to reason with them, telling them that we meant no harm and just wanted to enjoy a peaceful weekend in the woods. But the men were having none of it. They started to circle around us, making lewd comments and brandishing makeshift weapons. I could feel my fear turning into anger as they continued to taunt and threaten us. My boyfriend and I stood back to back, ready to defend ourselves if we had to, but we were outnumbered, and the men were getting more and more violent. One of them swung a heavy branch at my boyfriend, knocking him to the ground. I tried to help him up, but another man grabbed me by the hair and pulled me back. I screamed, fighting against him as he dragged me away from my boyfriend. I don't remember much after that. It all happened so fast. I remember the sound of breaking branches and the stinging pain of being hit repeatedly. I remember my boyfriend's voice calling out my name, and then everything went black. When I came to, it was morning, and the sun was shining through the trees. I was lying on the ground, bruised and battered but alive. My boyfriend was nowhere to be seen. I called out his name, but there was no response. I stumbled through the woods, looking for any sign of him. And then I saw it, a pile of leaves matted with blood. I knew that was him. As I lay there sobbing, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police had arrived. They found me and took me to the hospital, where I received treatment for my injuries and was interviewed about what happened. Over the next few weeks, the police conducted a thorough investigation. They searched the woods for any clues or evidence and questioned anyone who may have been in the area at the time of the attack. It was a grueling process, but eventually they were able to identify the 3 men responsible for my boyfriend's death. They were arrested and charged with murder, and the case went to trial. I was called to testify, reliving the horrific events of that night in front of a packed courtroom. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, but I knew I had to do it for my boyfriend. In the end, the 3 men were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. It was some small consolation for the loss of my boyfriend, but it provided a sense of closure that I desperately needed. The woods of Rotonga still exist, And I know that some people still go there to camp and hike, but for me, it will always be a place of heartbreak and tragedy. A place where the peaceful tranquility was shattered by the senseless violence of 3 drunken men. I knew my uncle was going to die before he did. Basically, I had a dream, and in that dream it was the first Christmas without my uncle. All this was about 2 months before he told us he had cancer, mind you. I thought it was just an awful dream. Then, of course, later down the line, he told us he had cancer. My dream instantly came to the forefront of my mind, but I didn't tell anyone. The first Christmas without him, 2 years later, played pretty much the same as that dream I'd had. A strange, ominous feeling of deja vu crept over me that day, but I never told anyone, for fear it would make me seem like I was making his death about me, if that makes sense. I just thought it was strange and creepy, and I've never had an opportunity to discuss it with anyone. What do you think? My wife and I were staying at my father's house after he passed away. Everyone in the family spoke about the house being haunted for as long as I can remember. But personally, I never had anything weird prior to this, and overall just chalked it up to that side of the family having an overactive imagination. We were at the house for around a week to help clean it out, as it was around 6 hours away from where we lived. There were several weird events leading up to the final event that changed myself and my wife forever. The house itself was a postage stamp style Victorian house with 2 floors and a semi-finished apartment style attic. So I was going up to the attic to work on cleaning out some stuff my father had up there. He was an avid collector of NASCAR diecast and other collectibles, and things were everywhere. On my way up the steps, I was on the phone with my wife, who had went to get food, when I saw the handle on the attic door twist and the door open slightly. The area we were in was not necessarily dangerous, but was far from nice. I instantly thought someone had broken in and immediately ran up to investigate. I searched everywhere and couldn't find anyone, so that was quite alarming. For the second event, myself, my wife, and the childhood friend were in the same attic cleaning out items. In the attic, there was a thick old shag carpet that must have been there since the 70s, and since it was a semi-finished attic, one room was for storage, and that's where my buddy was working. I look at my wife, who literally just points at the door. We both watch in horror as the door for the room slowly closes on my buddy by itself. There was zero reason or explanation. We both saw it, and the door itself took a large amount of force to actually close. Obviously, my buddy was pretty unhappy, and we both just said, "Oh, sorry, forgot you were there," to avoid him thinking that we were both losing our minds or trying to scare him. However, it all culminated in the last event. The last night we ever stayed there, we slept on the 2nd floor in the master bedroom. The bedroom itself was positioned so that the headrest of the bed's wall was aligned with a set of stairs coming up. The wall and stairs were about 3 to 15 feet difference in height, depending on the location, an important piece to what ended up happening. Throughout the night, my wife kept waking me up to say someone was walking around on the platform landing outside. I look, and did see what looked like a shadow under the doorframe. So I immediately opened the door and braced for what I assumed was an intruder. Again, nothing. And after searching the house extensively, there was still nothing. Later that night, I'm awoken to the sound of scratching on the wall behind my head. My wife is already awake and looking at me oddly as she hears it too. I assume it's just a rat or some kind of animal. While weird, it was directly behind me, and would not be far-fetched as the house did have critters in it. In a tired rage, I turned around and just punched the wall to scare whichever animal it was off. And within a second, something punches back with such force it shakes the entire wall. Then we both heard footsteps and stomping running away from us and up the attic stairs. At this moment we are both at a loss for words and immediately pack up with our son and leave. We call out the police and just assume it has to be someone who broke in, until the next day when we start to think about it. The area where the scratching had occurred was above the steps, a good 10 feet, and even an extremely tall man would have trouble reaching with a ladder. However, even if they could reach, what we couldn't explain is how this thing ran on a floor that literally does not exist. The sound of running was not going up the steps, but as if there was a hallway or floor directly behind the wall, which there wasn't. The police found no signs of a break-in or any intruder being there. The security cameras outside never had any alerts or saw anyone come in. So much so we ended up selling the house with everything in it and never stayed there again. I came down briefly a few weeks later to finish up, and just went to tell my father goodbye at the house. Upon entering, the house felt so hateful. I don't understand how a house could have feelings, but if someone were to ask me what it felt like, hateful would be the word I used. I have no idea to this day what any of it was. And to clarify, had I not been in such a state of grief, I would not have investigated this stuff after the first event. My dad always brushed off the other family members claiming it to be haunted as no big deal, and even in my childhood years visiting, I never once had an odd experience. My dad and I had a good relationship throughout his life, and he never spoke about the house in a negative manner. The house was built by a French family in 1879 and was acquired by my family in 1952, some 70 years later. And since then, until my father's passing, nothing traumatic ever happened, nor weird family events. It was just a plain old boring house, which just adds to the mystery. To this day, my wife and I still cannot talk about these events without getting chills. I used to work at a thrift store for about 3 years, and by that point, I was used to creepy and paranormal things happening, since the majority of the items we'd get in belonged to the recently deceased. Let me give you a small layout of what the store looked like. Our store was pretty large, and there were technically 3 sections to it. The first was the entrance of the store, which consisted of clothing, linens, knickknacks, kitchenware and shoes, and we also had a hallway that led to the second half of the store. This section had wall decor, a library room, bathroom item sections, and an electronics room. Lastly, the third section of the entire building was what we called the warehouse. At the entrance of the warehouse were our lockers and the manager's office to the right, then the electronics testing area and the sorting and pricing table to the left. The rest of the warehouse was very large and had tons of giant cardboard boxes called gaylords. These cardboard boxes are about 4 to 5 feet tall and have various sorted items inside of them. They were all aligned to the right side of the warehouse in 4 rows. We kept those to the side because they usually had holiday items we'd use for later for big events. We'd also make pathways large enough to get to them and into them if need be. Located at the very, very far back of the corner were the boxes full of clothing, which we called the clothing area. There we would sort through the clothes and hang them on racks. Then we dragged them to the first section of the store and put the clothes on the sales floor. Now, for the story. I was closing with my other co-worker, and it was just the 2 of us. That night I remember it was winter, so even though it was only around 6 p.m, outside it already looked like midnight. My co-worker had asked me to put away all the clothes on the rack and then place the rack by the clothing area in the warehouse when I was done. We only had 1 customer in the store at the time, and the lady was browsing through things in the electronics section, and my co-worker was up front taking care of the register for me while I went to put away the empty rack. I walked down the hallway and entered the back of the store to the warehouse. I only turned on one of the lights, which brightened the clothing area and left the rest of the warehouse dimly lit. I didn't notice anything at first and carried on dragging this tall metal and noisy rack back to the corner of the warehouse. When I finally reached the clothes area and turned around, I heard a low wheezing sound, almost like a witchy growl, or someone silently trying to clear their airway. I stood there frozen and creeped out by the noise, and thought maybe it was my coworker trying to scare me. I even remember speaking towards the area the sound had come from, calling out my coworker's name. "Hello? Shannon?" No answer. I ignored it after a few seconds of standing there and began to walk steadily back towards the entrance of the warehouse. That's when I saw a short black shadow in my peripheral vision towards the row of boxes that were 2 or 3 feet away. I didn't stop walking, but I did turn my head towards the shadow and my heart dropped to my stomach. I saw a black 5-foot hunched over spirit following alongside me. It creepily limped and kept up with my speed, going past every box. It looked like an injured old lady with a broken foot and horrid posture. I remember at this point, I slightly began to run and kept my eyes on the spirit, hoping she wouldn't come towards us. She just kept limping and yet running alongside me until she went through the glass window and into my manager's office, vanishing completely. Panicked and afraid, I ran to my coworker, and just one look at me, she knew I had seen something horrifying. I told her everything, and she immediately believed me without hesitation. We both politely kicked the customer out early and closed the registers early too. My coworker had been working at the thrift store for a few years and knew that items we get sometimes come with a little extra. She too has experienced many strange and frightening things while working there, but she had never heard of someone seeing a full-body apparition like the one I saw. A few days later, Shannon tells my boss and a few other co-workers about my experience, and another co-worker, Rita, said she was closing the following night after my experience and saw the same hunched-over spirit in the warehouse. Hearing this gave me goosebumps. My cousin had a child about 8 years ago. My great-grandmother, a very beloved woman, an all-around great person, who I called Grandma Dora, passed away while his wife was pregnant, and only about 2 weeks before she was due. This was a big deal for a few reasons. My cousin would have been the first of his generation in my mother's side of the family to have a child, therefore would have been Grandma Dora's first great-great-grandchild. 5 generations alive at the same time. It would have been pretty cool, but she passed away from a stroke, and it was very tragic. Fast forward a few years, my cousin and his wife are showing their daughter family pictures. She was around 3 to 4 at the time, and they're asking her, "Do you remember who this is?" to see if she remembers the names of any aunts or uncles, etc. They sort of skip over Grandma Dora, and she puts her hand on the picture and says, "That's Grandma Dora." My cousin said she was a bit uncomfortable, but asked, "Do you remember hearing us talk about her?" And according to him, his daughter looked him right in the eyes and says, "No, but she visits and talks to me all the time." He said he didn't sleep right for a few weeks. Good thing we're all sure if she is a ghost, she's probably the most kind and gentle ghost there is. But still, it creeped me out. My name is Ulysses, and I'm what you might call an urban explorer. I love nothing more than venturing into abandoned buildings, seeking out hidden corners and forgotten treasures. And so when I heard about an old, decaying building in Colorado, I knew I had to see it for myself. The place was a wreck. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floors creaked ominously beneath my feet. But I was undeterred. With my trusty flashlight in hand, I began to explore. As I made my way through the dark and musty halls, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like someone whispering my name. I shook my head, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, louder this time. Ulysses. I turned around, shining my flashlight into the shadows, but there was no one there. I was alone. I shrugged it off and continued on my way. I was determined to find something interesting, something that would make the trip worthwhile. That's when it happened. I was climbing up a set of rickety stairs. My flashlight barely illuminated the way when the steps suddenly gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling down what felt like an endless flight of stairs. When I came to, I was lying on the ground, my body battered and bruised. I had no idea how long I'd been out, but I knew I needed to get out of there before something worse happened. I struggled to my feet and began to make my way back towards the entrance. But as I stumbled through the dark and dusty halls, I realized that I was lost. I had no idea which way to go. And that's when I heard the voice again. This time it was closer, more insistent. "Ulysses." I turned around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me. My heart pounding in my chest, I began to run. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to get out of there. The eyes followed me, watching my every move. I continued to move forwards, every step feeling like it could be my last. I could feel the pressure of the eyes getting closer, as if whatever was watching me was closing in on the kill. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from behind me. I whipped around to see a section of the floor collapse, sending debris tumbling down into the darkness below. A realization hit me like a ton of bricks. If I hadn't have moved when I did, I would have been standing on that exact spot when the floor gave way. With a renewed sense of urgency, I pressed on, the eyes still following my every move. But as I rounded a corner, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. There, blocking my path, was a figure that seemed to materialize out of the shadows themselves. It was a tall, thin creature, with long arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its skin was a sickly pale color, stretched tightly over its bones. But the worst part was its eyes. They glowed with an otherworldly light, fixed on me with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, unable to move, as the creature slowly advanced towards me. But then, something snapped inside me. I had come too far to let this thing take me down. With a scream of defiance, I charged forwards, my hand lashing out at the creature's face. To my surprise, my hands made contact, and I felt the creature's skin give way beneath my fingers. It let out a piercing shriek, stumbled back in shock, and I took my chance and bolted past it, running as fast as I could to the exit. The journey back up the stairs were a blur, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted towards the light of day. But when I finally burst out into the sunshine, I felt like I had been given a new lease on life. The cool breeze on my face and the sound of birds singing in the trees felt like a miracle after the horror I had just experienced. Looking back on that day, I can hardly believe I made it out alive, but I know that I owe my survival to something deep within me, a primal will that refused to let me give up, even in the face of unimaginable terror. My uncle passed away some time ago to liver cirrhosis, but a few months before he died, I saw a weird dream that I still remember quite clearly. In this dream, there was my sister, me, my sister's deceased father who passed in 2016, and my uncle. Now, little note that my sister's father and uncle were best friends, and the dad was also pretty close with me. In this dream, I walked to an apartment and rang the doorbell. My sister's father opened the door and I walked in and saw my uncle and sister in there too. But my sister quickly left, as if she couldn't be there. I went into the kitchen and her father and my uncle were talking to me. But there was an invisible barrier in the middle of the floor that I couldn't cross. But the uncle and my sister's father were on the other side of it. My sister's dad hugged me and told me it was going to be alright, and then I woke up. The first thought I had when I woke up was that my uncle was going to die soon. Then, the week before he died, I saw a dream of my grandma being hospitalized. This is because my grandpa's mental state would drop when he'd die, and it did once he died, but otherwise she's okay. Then I woke up. The first thought I had, once again, is that my uncle is going to die. But it was stronger. I could tell the time had come. The night he died, I felt a sharp pain in the middle of my stomach, and I burst out crying for a reason I didn't know. I could also feel a familiar presence watching me, and I thought it was very odd. The following morning I heard a song on the radio, a song my uncle played for me when I was little, and the balcony door slammed open. An hour later, my mum called me and told me he had passed away. My family and I moved into this house when I was 6. That's my parents and myself and my sister. When we first moved, I hated it here. I was constantly afraid, hearing weird noises and seeing shadows from the corner of my eye. There was one occasion when I was in the shower, and as I was shampooing, I heard someone breathe next to my ear. As you can imagine, the color rapidly drained from my face, and in fear, I jumped out the shower, naked, with shampoo all over my head, and ran downstairs crying to my mum in fear. I would have friends over, and when we were left alone in the house, we would also hear things and be scared. Almost the whole home is wood flooring, and we'd hear creaks and crackling like someone was walking around. Throughout our time in this new house, I found out that my parents were hearing music coming from the attic while they're in bed. Piano music, sometimes radio music. My father is someone who never takes crap from anyone, and I've never seen him be afraid of anything. So he would walk right up and pull the attic stairs down and check it out. As soon as he got to the top of the steps, the music would stop. He would check the whole attic and there was nothing that could produce music in there. In my high school years, I would go to bed and lock my door at night. Stupid, I know, but my dad wasn't one to knock, and I was often doing things I shouldn't. One night, I'm awoken in the middle of the night, and I'm a fairly deep sleeper. My doorknob was being shaken violently. Seeing the hour, I jumped out of bed and unlocked it, immediately assuming it was my dad and something was wrong. But no one was there. I go back to sleep thinking I must have been dreaming or something. This happened a total of 2 to 3 times over a fairly large span of years. I've also had knocks on my door in the middle of the night and early morning. My usual response is, yeah, but no one enters. I open the door, no one there. The last isolated incident I can remember was in 2016. I was working at a salon and the owner's daughter, who I became quite close to, died of an overdose. Our birthdays were only 3 days apart, and we'd always celebrated together at the salon. She had passed away in January and it was her birthday that night. It was late, between 1 or 2 a.m, and I was on the toilet in my bathroom and happened to think about her. I said out loud, "Happy birthday, Bonnie," and boom, I start hearing wild piano music above me in the attic. I freak out hard, ran downstairs and woke up my mum, who was asleep on the couch, because my parents no longer slept in the same bed. This is when she told me about the music when I was a kid. 2 weekends ago, there was nothing good on TV on Sunday, so I put on Unexplained. It's a ghost hunting show with qualified people doing the hunting. I kind of like the thrill of being scared and watching stuff like that, but I don't like it in my own home. My mum and I watched for a few hours until I went to pick up food and took our car because it was easier. There was this water bottle in the back seat of her car swishing around making noise. I had been in her car the day before, running hours worth of errands, and didn't notice it at all. I felt a strange presence and scaredness while I drove, and told myself I was just creeping myself out because I'd watched the show. That night, I go to bed, and wake up at 9 a.m. with 4 soft knocks on my bedroom door. I assume it's my mum and say, "Yeah?" But there's nothing. I go back to sleep for an hour or 2, and wake up later and asked if she knocked on my door this morning. She said she hadn't. So the very next night I go to sleep. I have this old Harman speaker and bass set in my bedroom. It's 4 a.m. and the thing is humming, loud and creepy. Each one of the tones sound like it's more and more echoey or getting closer. I quickly turn on my phone's flashlight and it stops immediately. I've grown older in this house, and for a very long time I stopped feeling scared. Was watching the show the sort of gateway for the spirits to start telling me they're still here? I don't know. Personally, I just really hope none of this creepy stuff ever happens to me again. My story starts when I was 11 years old and an only child, living with both my mum and dad. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was built around 1900, and my father still resides there to this day. He was a police officer for a small city located about 12 miles from our home and worked the midnight shift as a shift sergeant. So at night it was just me and my mum there. The house is out in the country and surrounded by nothing but fields and pastures. So as a child I spent a lot of time in the fields and woods playing in the barns we had. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. The house was heated by a Franklin wood stove, the kind that has the doors that open in front and fold up as you open it. It was located in what we called the middle of the room. The downstairs consisted of a large kitchen, a large middle room, and then a big living room. Directly above the wood stove in the ceiling is a metal grate that's about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. This is to allow the heat rising off the stove to go upstairs. My parents' room was directly above the middle room, and their bed was right next to the metal grate in their floor. My room was right off theirs. The stairway was located in my room, and the wall that the stairs came up to was completely open, exposing the stairway with a banister to keep me from falling over down the stairs. The incident took place one night in early fall. Dad was at work, so it was just me and my mum at home. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awoken to the sound of the fireplace poker striking the wood stove, and it sounded as if someone was stirring the fire and not being quiet about it at all. My first thought was, why the heck is she building a fire? It's hot here already. After probably another 30 seconds of banging, I heard my mother call out my name. The only thing was, she was calling my name from her room. When she called out my name, the banging stopped, and I responded back with, "Yes? What are you doing, son?" "I'm not doing anything, I'm in bed." "Then who's doing that?" she asked. I told her I didn't know. I thought it was her. So I got up a little scared. My thought was that someone had broken into the house. My mum grabbed the .38 S&W she kept in her nightstand and we go downstairs. When we get to the room, the doors are wide open on the stove and the poker is laying in the stove. We searched the entire house and checked all the doors and windows, but nothing. Mum checked to make sure there was no bird in the chimney. Nope, all good there. So we close up the stove, place the poker back under the stove and go back upstairs to our respective beds. No sooner than we get in bed and it starts again. Only this time it's much louder than before. I get up and go to their room. My mum is laying in bed, looking over the edge at the grate and looking down at the stove. When I looked too, I was blown away. There, in the light of the kitchen light, you could see the doors were open again and the poker was slamming around all over the place on the stove, but there was no one holding it. My mum yelled out, "Who's there?" and the poker fell to the floor. Again, we go downstairs and check everything. It was all as we left it. The stove doors were open again, the poker laying on the floor in front of the stove, and we still talk about it to this day. I never saw anything else and that never happened again, but after that, I would hear the stairs creak slowly in the night, as if someone was slowly walking up them. And even today, it feels like you're being watched in that house. In later years, I discovered that when my dad bought the house, he got it for a very good price. The former owners, an elderly couple, had lived there their entire married life, and when the last one died, it stood empty for a long time after it was a rental and no one stayed. It was found that their only son, a Vietnam veteran, and after coming home developed many issues, until one day he went down to the cellar and took his own life with a rifle. Very sad ending. Still today, that place gives me the creeps big time. There's a dark energy there, and I always hated the cellar. That was when I was a kid, and I didn't even know what happened. It just felt evil and like there were eyes on you. It was the beginning of a journey into the unknown for me. Even though it was years before the other things began to happen around me, that night still gives me chills big time just remembering it. My mum told me this story the other day, and it freaked me the hell out. It goes that when my older sister was little, about 3, she asked my then pregnant aunt to pick her up and hold her. My mum said she was like, "She can't pick you up, honey. She has a baby in her tummy." And then my little sister was like, "That baby is dead." My mum freaked out, but my aunt and grandma were fine, and were telling my mum it was all good. She was a toddler and didn't know what she was saying. Well, lo and behold, my aunt goes to the doctor the next day for a routine pregnancy checkup, and the baby was dead. It gives me the willies just thinking about it. I'd heard the rumors. Whispers passed among the staff and patients alike, like an unspoken truth that hung heavy in the air. They spoke of a presence that lingered within the dimly lit corridors of the old hospital, a ghostly spectre that haunted the very foundation of its existence. I scoffed at the tales, dismissing them as mere superstitions born out of the long hours and eerie atmosphere that permeated the sterile walls. But that was before I experienced it firsthand. Late one night, as the hospital settled into an unsettling silence, I found myself assigned to the graveyard shift. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows along the hallway as I made my rounds, the emptiness of the hospital magnified in the absence of bustling activity. The silence pressed against my eardrums, creating a sensation of isolation that sent a chill down my spine. As I walked past closed doors and vacant rooms, a cold breeze brushed against my cheek, raising goosebumps on my skin. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickened my pace, eager to escape the suffocating grip of the hospital's ghostly tales. But as I turned the corner, a figure emerged from the darkness, a silhouette draped in tattered hospital attire. My heart raced as I recognized the unmistakable presence of a ghostly apparition. It stared at me with hollow eyes, an ethereal glow emanating from its translucent form. Panic seized me, rendering me immobile, my voice trapped in my throat. The ghostly figure moved closer, its steps silent, yet I could hear its labored breathing, like a whisper on the edge of my consciousness. The air grew heavy, suffused with an otherworldly energy that permeated every inch of the hallway. I tried to retreat, to escape the clutches of this spectral entity, but it was as if an invisible force held me in place. The ghost extended a pale, translucent hand towards me, its touch icy against my skin. I could feel a surge of dread coursing through my veins, a primal fear that defied explanation. Images flashed before my eyes, vivid and haunting. I glimpsed scenes of suffering and despair, of lives cut short and pain left unresolved. It was as if the ghost sought to share its own tormented existence, to impress upon me the weight of its unfinished business. Time seemed to stand still as I stood face to face with this ethereal being, caught between the realms of the living and the dead. I could sense its desperation, its yearning for closure and release from the confines of the hospital walls. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the ghost vanished, leaving behind only an echo of its presence. The air grew still once more, the hallway returning to its desolate state, as if the encounter had been a figment of my imagination. But the memory lingered, etched into my mind like a haunting refrain. The ghost's message, though unspoken, had been clear. It longed for peace, for its spirit to find solace beyond the hospital's confines. From that night on, I carried the weight of that encounter, a reminder that the supernatural can weave its way into our reality, reminding us of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The hospital's halls held more secrets than any medical chart could convey, and its ghostly inhabitant continued to roam, a spectre caught in an eternal dance between the realms of the living and the departed. I've had a few experiences with sleep paralysis, and stuff like where I think I see a demon, or my soul is actually being claimed by Satan. But this one was different. I woke up in the middle of the night and can feel a presence to my left. It felt cold. It felt like an icy blue orb, and I could feel exactly where it was located. It didn't make much sense, because my bed was right up against the left wall, so it would have been floating in the air about 2 stories up. I hadn't even thought about moving, as its presence was so interesting, and I was entirely focused on that. It went through the wall. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. As it passed through the wall, it took form, somewhat like a human shape. Then it came around my bed to the bottom right corner. It crouched down and then jumped onto me, straddling me. I can't remember if I couldn't move before or just hadn't tried, but when it was on top of me, I definitely couldn't move at all. I was doing some work that night and had fallen asleep with my laptop, which was a little to my left and had fallen during the shifting of my sleep. It was angled towards me still, and the subtle glow from the illuminated screen allowed me to partially see this being. I couldn't make out the details because the being was translucent like glass, so I could only make out parts of it from the edges. I'm kind of arrogant, and like I've said, have been attacked in a similar fashion before, although this one was certainly the most brazen. So for some reason I actually wasn't scared and more annoyed. So then I felt it pull out a weapon like a dagger, and it tried to stab me in the center of my chest, but it didn't work, like I was wearing a bulletproof vest, and the dagger would not penetrate. Before, the way it moved and when it jumped happened fairly quickly, but by this time it was like we were telepathically linked in some way. I could feel its feelings, and it felt like it could feel mine. No words came from the being though, only emotions. I could feel its surprise and frustration when the dagger did not go through. The feeling of being also turned from blue to red, then a burning red. It kept trying to stab me over and over, never penetrating, and the being kept getting angrier and angrier, just super angry and frustrated, since it didn't work in the first few attempts. I was quite confident it wasn't going to work at all, so I began to sort of heckle it into my head, which I could feel it here was like, I give up already. It's gonna work, and stuff like that. This only made him angrier and stab faster, and after several attempts of me getting tired of it, I prayed. I was a Christian at the time, and as soon as I began praying, it sort of flew away and just turned into nothing. I'm a skeptic, and think most of the stuff that happened to me was probably due to sleep paralysis. But for all those experiences, I just remember them the next day. What makes me think this was an actual experience of some kind was that as soon as it flew away, I was still awake and I could move again. I felt it float away and stayed awake in a through-line fashion. I didn't wake up or go back to sleep since my laptop was right there. I spent the rest of the night Googling and trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Eventually I did fall back asleep. I checked my history the next day, and all the history of me trying to research what it was were all right there. That's probably the craziest experience I've had. I could feel it was shocked and surprised, like it thought it was going to be a quick and easy mission, but it wasn't. This all occurred 5 years ago. I had a friend in high school called Dexter, and I was very good friends with him for a long time. I was having some issues at home, and had developed some anxiety due to it. So I was at his house as much as I could, as a place of comfort. I never experienced any weird stuff for at least a few months into knowing him. But as time progressed, that all changed, and progressively, things got worse and worse. I refuse to go over to his house now, and our friendship has drifted due to this. Keep this in mind. I don't believe there was a ghost in his house. I believe there was something far more dark and sinister, and I want to elaborate on that. A bit about Dexter and his family that I think personally attributed to whatever haunted this house. So, they were slobs. I mean, their house was filthy and disgusting. The more I got to know Dexter and his family, the more I realized how negative they all were, especially Dexter, who I was friends with at the time. Best friends, in fact. His dad was an addict, and so was Dexter, an addict to weed, alcohol, food, smoking, anything, it didn't matter. They lacked any semblance of self-control. This, I believed, was the main cause. I got Dexter into PC gaming, and let's say that he isn't too clever with his browsing history, and I accidentally stumbled onto some particular tastes he has. Very odd, specific tastes that I don't want to really go into. I'm no prude, so trust me when I say I doubt his taste is anything you've ever looked up late at night. I started to realize over the months that we were spending together every day, almost all day, that Dexter was a dark person, full of jealousy, hatred, selfishness, and, objectively speaking, a dumb person. He didn't really try to hide his vices. I found a lot of disturbing things in his room, and in closets in the house. I kept everything to myself, and he ended up telling me about his problems with his taste years later, and we both experienced a paranormal event that night, but this is a long and different story entirely. I think it's important to note that I was raised Christian, hold Christian beliefs, but I'm generally a bad Christian, and I've struggled with my faith and following what I believe. This hypocritical conviction, I believe, played a significant role in my haunting. His family attended a cultish church that partakes in holy laughter and speaking in tongues, something I was raised to believe was false and wrong. Whatever was haunting that house only haunted me, and still to this day, Dexter and his family think I made everything up. So let's get into the experiences. It must have been around 6 months into being there every day, but it might have been sooner. I started keeping my gaming PC at Dexter's house after knowing each other for a few months. This came after some other stuff that happened at home, and when Dexter wasn't home, I would hang out there alone and chill after school. I basically lived there. I kept all of my stuff in his small guest room, which shared a wall with Dexter's room. The first experience I had was playing CSGO and heard what sounded like footsteps directly above my head. To give context to people who don't know what that is, it's a competitive game that requires a lot of focus, so even though I could hear these sounds above my head, I just ignored them. It was the first time I would hear footsteps that would become all too familiar. They sounded like pirate boots on a boat, if you'd ever heard of Pirates of the Caribbean, dramatic large thuds with each step. The sound persisted for at least 10 minutes off and on, before abruptly stopping, which was immediately followed by the closet door, a thin, sliding plywood door an arm's length away from me, being hit from the inside hard. Imagine a small child were to run into a door. The desk my monitor was set on shook, and I just was baffled and stuck in my chair from pure fear. I stared at the sliding door, waiting for it to open, but it became quiet, with no footsteps. It scared me to the point where I just sprinted out the room and to the front of the house, where I stayed until Dexter got home. I told him what happened and he didn't think much of it. He went into the room and he slid open the door. Nothing. I searched the whole closet. No holes that rats could have come out of, only a few empty cardboard boxes. From this point it became a norm for me to hear footsteps directly above my head, but only whenever I was there alone. The footsteps would follow me through the house, and occasionally I would stop, and they would stop right above my head, and if I stayed still long enough they would stop. I can't emphasize enough how much they matched my movement, and this may sound odd, but they reacted to my thoughts. I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to move in 3, 2, 1, and before I actually moved, the footsteps would stomp around and walk in circles. It was horrifying, and I seriously could not explain it to myself. This was disturbing to me, but I really didn't have anywhere else to go, so I just ignored it and chalked it up to rats or something. This phenomenon would happen every few days when I was alone in the house, and each time it made me so scared and made me feel so alone. Fast forward a year, I'm laying in bed, it's Saturday morning, and I'm there in the house alone in the guest room. Dexter is at work, his parents aren't home, and it's 11 a.m., and I'm scrolling mindlessly on my phone. Breaking the dead silence instantly, I hear footsteps in the attic, but this time running from across the house very aggressively to exactly over my head. I remember it vividly. The running stopped right over my head, and I just laid there in fear and in silence. The footsteps seemed like they were angry, and for the first time I felt a presence. It's hard to explain, but imagine your eyes are closed and someone gets very close to your face, even though you can't see nor hear, that you can sense them. That's how it began to feel with this thing. I would sense it before I heard it. I became very acute to its presence over the years. It was a good 2 minutes before I went to get out of bed, and then, exactly as I had mentioned with the footsteps to the thought of myself moving, a loud crash directly above me right where I was looking straight into the ceiling from the attic. It was as if you were deadlifting 150 pounds and then threw it to the ground as hard as you could. I immediately sprinted out the house, except this time I walked home because I knew it would be hours before anyone would return. This is where I began dreading sleeping at his house. What is in his attic? I became obsessed with the question. I told Dexter this and he nonchalantly wrote it off as animal. But as much as I explained it to him that it reacted to my thoughts, he just didn't think much of it. A few days after this, we were in his garage, where there is an entryway to his attic. I convinced him to get a ladder and see what we can find there. I went up first and shined a deep light into the darkness of the room. I couldn't see anything, and no amount of money on earth would compel me to enter this room. Something about it was just wrong. I, however, saw a black box, right in the back corner of the attic, right above the guest room. I think this box was what was dropped over my head days previously, and I had Dexter look at it, and he saw it as well. In hindsight, I wish we had gone over to look at what was in the box. At this point, I want to clarify that I'm completely stable, have no history of schizophrenia nor insanity in my family, and am an extremely rational person, and up until this point, had no interest nor belief in ghosts, spirits, or demons. I want to preface this because things get a little crazy now. So Dexter had a dog called Patrick. Patrick and I were best buds. He was truly an extraordinary dog. I loved him with all my heart, and he comforted me in my lowest moments since it was hard then, and I never really opened up to anyone. When I experienced all of these things happening to me, Patrick was there with me. So when I say alone, I wasn't really. In fact, I think if Patrick wasn't there, I would not have been able to endure it. He was with me every single time I'd walk to get water or go to the bathroom, made food, and the loud, horrifying footsteps would come back instantly over my head. It was basically a jump scare that would come randomly, and it made me very paranoid and hesitant to move around the house. It was an abusive being that enjoyed haunting me and toying with me. Dexter and his family left for a week to go on vacation and asked me to take care of Patrick. At this point I had 2 computers. I kept one at Dexter's and one at my own, and things had subsided a bit at my house, so I didn't spend every night at Dexter's anymore. I went over to Dexter's house every day, played with Patrick and fed him, and I would hang around there for a few hours and head home. 3 days after Dexter's family left, I walked into their house and Patrick is freaking out, barking at something in the middle of his living room. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't. He's snarling and barking as if something was in the middle of the living room. Finally, after what seems like 5 minutes, he relaxes a bit, but still on guard, and follows me to his food bowl, and then into the guest room, where I played some games. I didn't feel a presence or hear any footsteps, which was a rarity. I leave, and the next day I come over to the same thing. Patrick is freaking out, this time far more aggressively. He's moving around the living room, but his gaze and posture is poised around the center of the living room as he moves around it. I feel the presence this time. As I watch Patrick bark and whimper and freak out, I try and listen. I listen intently for a few minutes and swear I didn't move a muscle. Patrick calmed down and looked at me, as if he knew I was just standing there listening. Finally, I think, all right, I don't hear anything, Maybe Patrick is just upset that Dexter and his family are gone. This is the first time they'd left since I'd known them, and they spent a lot of time in the living room together. As I barely moved an inch, there was a huge boom above my head. I jumped at least 5 feet into the air, stomping, jumping, and clawing on the floor above my head. Patrick starts to freak out and starts to almost attack the air in the middle of the living room. I am thoroughly freaked the hell out, so I run over to Patrick's food bowl, pour a lot of food, and run out of the house. It was around this time that I realized I really just do not ever want to be in this house again, alone or not. The next 2 or 3 days I go over there, Patrick is still freaked out, but not barking or anything related to the living room, so I quickly fed him and left. On the last day before Dexter and his family came home, something happened. I entered the door and immediately feel this presence. It's almost as if the air itself gets humid and thick. I'm on guard, and Patrick is crying this time. He is literally crying, jumping on me and whimpering as I enter the door. I take 1 step into the door, and a loud footstep right above me. The first step I took into the house, I had gotten almost annoyed with this thing at this point. It didn't bother to stop and listen. I just headed straight to his food bowl. I walked over to the side room where it's kept, and it's missing. The food bag, which is heavy and zipped, is sitting right there. The bowl is missing. I look around, and as I walk around the house, I hear the footsteps following me in the attic above. Patrick is whimpering, and every few seconds barking. I walk back out the living room, and what I saw next has literally changed my life forever. Patrick's food bowl is sitting directly in the middle of the living room, right where Patrick had been barking and attacking the air a few days prior. It was completely full of food. In fact, it was overflowing, as if it was a message. I knew why you were coming here. I remember walking backwards slowly out the house, stunned. I could not believe my eyes. I shut the door and got into my car. I forgot to mention I drove over with my girlfriend and it was late. She knew about Dexter's house and the things I've experienced there. She said I was as white as a sheet, and apparently had tears streaming down my face. Before I even said a word, I had the car pulling out the driveway and she frantically was asking what happened. It was at that moment I decided I would never go to his house alone again. Dexter and his family came back and I told them what happened. His mum looked at me like I was joking, and she half listened to me, half listened to the TV show she was watching. I told his dad that maybe a homeless person was living in their attic and that he has to look in there. He finally accepted. He and Dexter and I went to the garage with the ladder, and his dad peered into the attic with a flashlight. He said there's nothing in there. And I said, in the back right corner there's a black box. No, there's not. Dexter and I look at each other, and for the first time, I think Dexter looked a bit scared. He saw the black box himself. Dexter and I told his dad about the box, and I told him that it was thrown at the ceiling floor when I was in the house alone. He didn't care. He simply shut the attic door, climbed down the stairs, and put the ladder back. I told Dexter that I was done sleeping at his house, and I was done staying there at all, period. I told him that if he wanted to come over to my house, that's fine, but I was going to take my computer home, and that was that. He was super pissed, but I told him that over the years he never took me seriously and I was done. It simply was too scary to be there, and after spending so much time there and enduring a lot of hardships in my own personal life, I associated the horror of that house with the anxieties and worries in my own life. Throughout sharing this, I remembered so many other things that happened to me in the house, but I think you get the point. Leaving the house for good was a life-changing decision. I don't know why these things happened to me, but in a weird way it made me feel a stronger person, because I had to decide I was done, and I didn't care how I made Dexter feel. My whole life I never cared about myself first, and this was the first time I did. I've been back over since, and vowed to never go again. And in the short time I go over, I still feel a presence there. But Dexter was a good friend, and he struggles with a lot of his own demons, so when he begs me to come over for a few hours, I do. I tried to spend the night one more time, and the sliding closet door was ran into again, like the first time I was falling asleep. But this completely solidified my decision to never stay the night there again. I learned things about Dexter after all this went down that made a lot of the evil in the house make much more sense. Dexter is a disturbed and confused person, and his family has a history of disturbing and sinister events. Whatever it is in his house has forever changed my life and my views on the unexplainable. I also want to add I should have taken Patrick. I think that something that sharing this made me realize was that there are a lot of reasons why I couldn't, but I should have tried. I had the only key to his house, all the doors were locked, and I would have known if the house was broken into. When I saw the food bowl, I literally just couldn't think straight. It was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life, and I just walked backwards out the house while I looked at it. He was barking in the living room when I shut the door and locked it, and I remember exactly the way he jumped and barked as I closed the door, as if I was looking at a picture. I could hear him barking as I walked to my car. My girlfriend was so confused as to why I walked backwards. She was laughing. Then I got in and she saw I was crying. I didn't even realize until we were at the driveway, and I regret not taking him a lot. Leaving the house was the best decision of my life, and I hope that when I left, it left too, and it would leave Patrick alone. My Girl Guides group used to meet in the elementary school library, where there was an ongoing rumor that one of the custodians died under the school, and you could see him opening and closing the doors as he walked through the school. That you could hear his breathing and the keys on his belt jingle as he continued his job in the afterlife. This rumor was around for a long time, even when I attended school. Several times when my guide group was leaving the library, a chair or two would fall off the desk. We used to say it was the ghost getting angry that we were leaving. My mother was one of the guide leaders, so I would almost always leave last. When we were wrapping up a meeting one night, a friend and I were hanging out in the library reading the books while the other girls were getting picked up. My mother called us from down the hall, and we got up to leave, and as soon as we walked out the door, every single chair crashed to the ground and the power bumped. As cliche as it sounds, I think about that ghost a lot, whether or not he was ever real. After my grade graduated to high school, his activity stopped completely and he was slowly forgotten. I don't think his stories are told anymore in the school. A lot of the staff retired and were replaced, and my age group who would remember him all graduated or have graduated already. And honestly, it feels like I've lost a friend. I have 4 sons. My eldest son is 6, and he's the one I'm curious about. Since he was very young, first learning to talk, he occasionally said things that didn't make any sense for him to know. We were on vacation with my in-laws at the beach when he was around 2.5, and he had a blast in the water with my husband and I. The next day, we got up bright and early to go back, and he adamantly refused. He kept insisting that there were alligators in the water. We tried to reason with him that alligators don't live in salt water, but he wasn't having it. Well, my husband had taken one of our twins, almost a year old, into the water and they were playing. A few moments later, a man comes running from the pier yelling at him to get out the water and for us to get away. He explained that while watching the water from the pier, he saw an alligator just underneath the water, stalking my husband from a distance. He called 911 and animal control arrived and were eventually able to locate and capture the alligator. It was 8 feet long. There had been storms during the night and it was mating season. The explanation was that he was looking for a mate and had come in through a freshwater river that runs into the sea. But how could my son have known about that hours before it happened? Another time I was outside to do yard work and he told me to not go near the bushy tree, a fig tree, because there was a rattlesnake under it. I thought it was just childhood imagination. I'm doing the yard work and I go over to the tree to see if any figs are ripe, and I heard a rattle. I looked down and I was about 3 foot away from a rattlesnake and it wasn't happy to see me. I quickly got away as to not disturb it and hope it would be on its way. He shouldn't have known it was there. Another time we were going to visit my mum and he was asleep. We hadn't told him where we were going because she had a surprise for him. We got in the car and he said, "You can't go this way to Grandma's because the bridge is out." We always went that way if my husband was driving, and the bridge had been fully operational the day before. Sure enough, we get to the bridge and it's taped off with a detour sign. There is no way he could have known about that. Word hadn't even gotten out yet, especially since my cousin is the local supervisor, and he didn't tell anyone about it until after I called him. I honestly find this all a little creepy, because I cannot, logically, explain it. I had been a priest for many years, dedicating to serving my congregation and offering spiritual guidance to those in need. However, nothing in my years of training and ministry could have prepared me for the horror that I was about to witness. It was a dark and chilling chapter in my life that would forever be etched into my memory. The call came unexpectedly, piercing through the quiet solitude of my study. A tremor of urgency and distress permeated the voice on the other end of the line. It was a desperate plea from a shattered family grappling with an unimaginable affliction. Their teenage daughter, once vibrant and full of life, had become a vessel for something sinister, something beyond their comprehension. The family believed she was ensnared in the clutches of a demonic entity, and they implored me to perform an exorcism, their last glimmer of hope in a seemingly endless situation. I could sense the gravity of the situation as I listened to the family's anguish-filled accounts. They described weeks of unnerving behavior, marked by inexplicable changes in their daughter's demeanor. She spoke with an otherworldly voice, her actions becoming increasingly bizarre and alarming. Despite seeking help from medical professionals and mental health experts, no earthly diagnosis or treatment could explain the darkness that had taken root within her. The family's desperation propelled them to seek divine intervention, and I, as their spiritual guide, felt compelled to offer my assistance. With a heavy heart and a resolute spirit, I made my way to their home, shrouded in an air of trepidation as the door creaked open. I was greeted by the worn faces of the parents, their eyes clouded with fear and exhaustion, and there, standing before them, was their daughter, a mere shadow of her former self. Her once rosy complexion had faded to an eerie pallor, and her eyes bore the weight of an unfathomable torment. After exchanging somber greetings, we gathered in a room permeated with the sense of foreboding. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as we prepared for the harrowing task that lay ahead. I took a moment to pray, to beseech the divine for strength and protection as I embarked on this perilous journey. As the ritual began, I called upon the divine power, fervently reciting prayers that had echoed through centuries of spiritual warfare. But in the initial moments, there was no discernible response. The girl remained seated, seemingly untouched by the sacred incantations and the holy water I carefully administered. Doubt whispered in the recesses of my mind, but I banished it, knowing that steadfast faith and unwavering determination were my weapons in this battle against the forces of darkness. Then, as if triggered by an invisible switch, the atmosphere shifted. The girl's eyes rolled back, exposing only the whites, while her body contorted with a grotesque grace that defied the laws of nature. From her trembling lips emerged a voice that belonged to a world far removed from our own. A voice laced with malevolence, dripping with icy venom of malevolent intent that had taken a hold of her. Undeterred, I confronted the presence with unyielding resolve, locked in a battle of spiritual strength. The demon hissed and sneered, its words veiled in an incomprehensible language, taunting me with threats of harm and invoking unspeakable horrors. But I refused to succumb to fear. Clutching my crucifix, I intensified my prayers, invoking the divine light to pierce through the darkness. The room transformed into a battleground as the battle intensified. Inanimate objects were sent hurtling across the room, propelled by an unseen force, while the temperature plunged to bone-chilling depths. Yet amidst the chaos and turmoil, my faith burned unwaveringly. Hours stretched into an eternity as the struggle waged on, each passing moment amplifying the weight of the spiritual clash. I continued to beseech divine intervention, my voice unwavering, my spirit unyielding. The demon fought back with every ounce of its malevolence, but I knew that I couldn't falter. The stakes were too high, and the girl's soul hung in the balance. And then, as if a celestial symphony had reached its crescendo, a final surge of divine power surged through me. The demon's grip weakened, its hold on the girl's fragile form loosening. In one final act of defiance, it released its tenuous hold, vanquished by the unwavering strength of faith. The girl slumped forward, her trembling body drained of vitality. She was physically exhausted, but a glimmer of serenity had returned to her countenance. The room, once engulfed in a maelstrom of supernatural activity, now settled into an eerie calm. Taking a moment to catch my breath and steady my trembling hands, I approached the girl, my heart brimming with a mix of relief and compassion. I performed and concluded prayers, invoking divine blessings upon her wounded soul, praying that she would find solace and healing after the ordeal she endured. The family, their eyes welled with tears, surrounded their daughter, their voice a chorus of gratitude and overwhelming emotion. They thanked me profusely, their words carrying the weight of profound gratitude for the role I had played in their lives, but I humbly redirected their appreciation to the divine, acknowledging that I was merely an instrument in a much larger tapestry of faith and grace. As I left the house, my steps were heavy with the weight of the experience. The memory of that harrowing exorcism would forever be etched in my soul, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows, waiting to seize vulnerable spirits. But it also served as a testament to the power of faith, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even in the face of unimaginable horror, the light of the divine can prevail. In the days that followed, I reflected upon the profound truths I had witnessed. The experience strengthened my resolve as a priest, fueling my commitment to guide those in need, to lend a compassionate ear to the broken-hearted, and to stand firm in the face of spiritual battles that lie ahead. It was a sobering reminder that the fight against evil is ongoing, and the role of faith and spiritual fortitude is more crucial than ever. The memory of that exorcism would forever serve as a beacon, reminding me of the reality of the spiritual realm and the unwavering duty I had undertaken as a priest. And though the battle had been won that day, the war against darkness would continue. For evil knows no bounds, but armed with faith, hope, and the grace of God, I would march forward, ready to face whatever horrors may come my way. A few months ago in the middle of summer, I dreamt of a snow-covered forest. It was dark and the woods were asleep. There were plenty of tracks through the snow, and many of them were child-sized footprints. As I knew there was an orphanage nearby, the snow was muddy in places and squished under my feet. The orphanage was a big 2-story building with white walls. I could see nightlights on through the windows, but I stayed in the tree line waiting. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for until I saw it. A dark, black mud puddle that seemed to be made of shadow. The mud slid to the side of the building and slowly started to slide up the side towards one of the windows. But I stopped it, sliding my hand into the mud, which was neither warm nor cold. I grabbed hold of something solid and pulled on the mud, dragging out a long, dripping sort of spine, thick with black mud that clung to my fingers. The more I pulled, the thicker it got, until a whole shadow stood in front of me, mud peeling back and dripping down until I could make out an animal's skull that appeared to be a wolf or dog's, but with bright, unsettling blue lights in the sockets and tall black horns. In my hand, I clutched the small end of a long, spiny, almost mangy tail. The air was still and silent as I stared at it. The thing had the lower half of a goat, but instead of fur, it had caked on mud that swirled and swished. Its torso and arms were hidden by the black mud. "Who are you?" it asked me. It sounded like the echo of a voice heard from far away, as if from some tall mountain. "How can you see me?" I tried to explain that I didn't know why I could see it, or what it was, but it seemed more fearful of me than I of it. So then I brought it to the tree line, its tail still in my hand, and we sat and spoke. It removed its skull, which it used as a mask, and the black mud fell to reveal a pale human form, pale and blue-tinted, as if it lacked blood. The eyes were the same empty blue light, and the horns stayed embedded in its head. He explained that he was a demon that feeds on life, by consuming the tiny bit that escaped when you dream of dying. He explained that they called these bits of life a fold, and they count each fold as a year of their own existence. He also referred to the mud on him as folds, and that his kind communicates with each other and breeds by mixing their folds. When I woke up, I could remember everything clearly, even the part where I told it I was going to wake up and that I hoped I'd see it again. I never got a name for it, but the closest thing I could find was a Japanese baku, which is a demon that eats dreams or nightmares. If anyone has any info, it would be greatly appreciated. I believe there's a possibility my house is haunted. We don't actually know how old the house itself is. It was in New York. Apparently the building that held the records burnt down in 1924, so that's just how old they say everything is. The previous owner moved in when he was 5 and then died on the property in his early 90s, in the early 2000s. Move-in day, I'm resting in one of the upstairs rooms and hear a loud, angry stomping in the attic over the room to the right of me. My husband hears it from downstairs. That would be 2 stories below. I wonder what the hell the problem is. He thought I was making the noise and comes up asking me what the hell was wrong. I told him it wasn't me, and we both shrugged. So I went up to the attic to investigate. There was nothing but an old toilet, a box of old photos in the corner with a trunk of honest-to-God Nazi stuff, like a 30-inch by 2-inch banner, an armband, a helmet, a freaking grenade, and there was an American pilot helmet too. Researching, I discovered the previous owner helped liberate some town in France. The banner used to go across the road, and the armband was from an enlisted person according to the type of stitching. We had house guests over one at a time, and they heard the stomping too. It's unmistakable, loud and angry running stomping stuff in the stairway of the attic, over the toilet and in the corner. We jokingly referred to the ghost as Moaning Myrtle. That night in the house, a guest said someone was choking her as if she was falling asleep. She said it felt like being choked and smothered at the same time, like her weight was being poured inch by inch over her body. She asked if I knew if anyone had been strangled and then poured cement onto, and I sincerely freaked out. The guest room happened to be directly under the photo area in the attic, so as you can imagine after that, I blessed and anointed the house. Thankfully, we never had another creepy incident following that. I grew up with a ghost. My brother and both my parents acknowledge we had a ghost in our house. In fact, when my parents sold the house in 1995, they actually disclosed the house was haunted. I became aware of him when I was around 5. We never saw him, it was just a feeling or a presence in the room. Though I never saw his physical form, He manifested in my thoughts as a Confederate soldier, as I live in the south of Georgia. In high school, I went to the library, because this was the late 70s, early 80s, and researched as much as I could about the Civil War battles in the area, and whether or not our house was built on top of a graveyard or anything like that. Thankfully, there's no record to say it was. I called him Harvey after the rabbit in the Jimmy Stewart movie, and he seemed to like the name. To me, he was my guardian angel and protected me when I was scared and would make me feel safe. As an aside, my maternal grandmother was criminally insane and tried to murder me when I was 12. She was such an evil woman. I knew she would come back to finish the job on me, I swear. I could always feel Harvey's presence, and I knew as long as he was around I was safe from her. Though it was creepy as hell to hear him walk around the house, and he'd close doors that were left open. Yes, you would walk into a room, and halfway across the room the door would close for you. My dog would begin barking when Harvey would enter the room, and would stare at the part of the room in which I felt he was standing in. He also had a fetish about scissors. Never really figured that one out. We could never keep a pair of scissors in the house longer than a few weeks, and then they'd vanish. My parents would ask me and my brother, and we'd be like, nope, no idea. When my parents sold the house in '95, they were cleaning out the garage and found over 40 pairs of scissors stashed in the back behind a metal shelving unit. We figured Harvey put them there. Maybe he was very cautious of them. He was also helpful. My mum and I worked together at Bell South in the early 90s, and I was living on my own at the time. She comes into work and is upset because she dropped her glasses and stepped on them that morning and they were broken, so she was having a hard time reading stuff that day. My dad was out of town and my brother lived in Boston, so we get through the workday. I've picked on her somewhat for her glasses, and then we went on with our respective ways home at the end of the day. Later that evening, my mum calls me and tells me I'm quite the sneaky one, and that she really appreciates what I did for her. I ask her what I did. She goes on to tell me she really appreciates me getting her glasses fixed for her, as when she got home, they were on the kitchen table, as she'd left them in the upstairs master bathroom, and that they were repaired, the frames no longer broken. I told her point blank to thank Harvey as I didn't do it. My brother was in another state and my dad was out of town on business. And it's not like we're the kind of people that just give anyone keys to our house to get in. We don't trust people that much. So yeah, it was probably Harvey the ghost. When I got married, I felt like he followed me to my house for a bit, but then he left as he realized I had a husband that loves me and looks out and protects me. I have no need for my guardian angel, and haven't done in decades, but I know if I should need him, Harvey will hopefully reappear. I hope whomever he is, his protection is appreciated as always. When I was little, so young I don't remember it, but I had just started talking. My parents were watching something on TV. I was playing on my own, not really paying attention. My dad said something like, "Hey, look at that old record player," to which I responded, "That's not a record player, that's a gramophone." My mum asked me how I knew that, and I casually replied, "I used to have one," and went back to playing with my alphabet blocks. I gazed out at the desolate landscape, the vastness of the untouched wilderness stretching out before me. It was as if time itself had forgotten this place, leaving it trapped in a forgotten era. The rugged terrain bore the scars of nature's relentless grip, with gnarled trees twisted towards the sky and moss-covered rocks scattered haphazardly across the floor. The air was heavy with a damp chill, seeping into my bones and sending a shiver down my spine. The scent of earth and decaying leaves mingled with the distant fragrance of pine, creating an intoxicating blend that both invigorated and unnerved me. The only sound that broke the eerie stillness was the occasional hoot of an owl or the haunting cry of a distant predator. As my friends and I ventured deep into the untamed wilderness, the trees grew thicker, forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight, casting a muted glow over the forest floor. Shadows danced and swayed with an ethereal grace, their elongated forms giving rise to a sense of foreboding. We pressed forward, drawn by an insatiable curiosity and the promise of escape from the trappings of modern life. After hours of navigating through dense foliage and traversing treacherous paths, we stumbled upon a clearing, a sanctuary amidst the wilderness. The clearing itself frozen in time, untouched by human presence for years. Tall grasses swayed gently in the breeze, and wildflowers painted the landscape with vibrant hues. At the heart of the clearing stood a weathered cabin, its planks weathered by layers of exposure to the elements. The windows were broken, allowing nature's tendrils to reclaim the interior. The porch sagged under the weight of neglect, creaking as if protesting our intrusion. We approached the cabin cautiously, our footsteps echoing through the silence, the rustling leaves beneath our boots adding a haunting soundtrack to the journey. The door groaned in protest as we pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior that seemed frozen in time. Dust particles danced in the slivers of sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the roof, casting eerie shadows on the worn, wooden floor. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, and a cold draft sent a chill down my spine. The remnants of a forgotten life lay scattered haphazardly, a dilapidated chair, a cracked mirror reflecting a distorted image, faded photographs that seemed to watch us from the walls. A sense of unease settled over us, as if the cabin itself held secrets, whispering its dark history from the depths of our souls. We shared uneasy glances, our imaginations running wild with thoughts of the countless stories this forsaken cabin could tell, stories we may never fully comprehend. Little did we know that this place, this seemingly abandoned sanctuary, was the gateway to our nightmarish encounter. It was here, in the heart of the wilderness, that we would come face to face with the enigmatic cult, their fanaticism seeping into every crevice of the desolate landscape, waiting for unsuspecting souls to stumble upon their malevolent ritual. In the fading light of the day, as darkness settled over the land, we would bear witness to the true horrors that awaited us, forever altering our perception of the untamed wilderness. A palpable shift in the atmosphere sent a shiver down my spine as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the clearing into an eerie darkness. The remaining light waned, shadows grew longer, and their presence looming ominously. Unease settled over the group, an unspoken understanding that we had stumbled upon something far more sinister than we could ever imagined. Whispers of a distant past, and the eerie tales of forgotten cults echoed in our mind. Suddenly, a flickering glow pierced the darkness, emanating from the cabin's interior. It danced and swayed like an unholy flame, beckoning us forward with haunting allure. We exchanged wary glances, our instincts warning us of the impending danger, but our morbid curiosity tugged at our hearts, urging us to uncover the truth. Slowly, we approached the cabin, our steps cautious and deliberate. The hushed whispers of the wind and the distant rustling of leaves accompanied our every move, creating an unsettling symphony of sounds. With each creak of the floorboards underneath our weight, the cabin seemed to exhale breath of secrets, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lay within. As we pushed open the creaking door, the flickering glow intensified, casting an eerie shadow on the dilapidated walls. The room was bathed in sickly yellow light, emanating from a circle of candles arranged meticulously on the floor. Symbols and sigils etched in crimson adorned the walls, their meaning lost to us, but evoking an undeniable sense of dread. In the center of the room, a group of figures dressed in dark robes stood in the solemn silence, their faces concealed by hoods. Their presence exuded a potent mix of fanaticism and malevolence. The air was heavy with anticipation, their unblinking gazes fixed upon us. Fear gripped our hearts, threatening to paralyze us, but deep within a flicker of resilience burned, urging us to resist, to fight against the tides of terror that threatened to engulf us. We were mere witnesses to an unspeakable ritual, a dance with darkness that we were never intended to participate in. With every ounce of strength, we turned and fled, our hearts pounding in our chest, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The cult members erupted into a cacophony of enraged shouts, their fanatical devotion fueling their pursuit. We dashed through the tangled undergrowth, our bodies bruised and battered, desperate to escape the clutches of this nightmarish encounter. Hours passed. We navigated the treacherous wilderness, our resolve pushed to its limits. Exhausted and wounded, we found refuge in a secluded cave, the darkness providing a temporary shield from the horrors we had witnessed. We huddled together shaking with adrenaline and terror, knowing that the memory of that cult encounter would forever haunt us. We reported the incident to the authorities, hoping they would uncover the truth behind the cult and prevent others from falling prey to their malevolent practices. But as the days turned into weeks, it became evident the cult, like a spectre in the night, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and nightmares. To this day, the memory of that encounter in the heart of the wilderness lingers, a chilling reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected corners of our world. It serves as a cautionary tale, urging others to tread carefully, for sometimes the line between tranquility and terror is perilously thin, and waiting to be crossed by unsuspecting souls. At last year's Relay for Life at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was sitting with my friends and must have dozed off. I usually can't sleep, and at this moment I've been awake for over 48 hours. I guess I was sleepwalking, but my friends recalled me getting up, mumbling something and stumbling away. They thought I was just getting something from my car and coming back. I recall waking up at the parking lot near my car, laying on the ground, and as I get up, I take very small steps all the way to my car and back out again. I constantly wake up in my car in the middle of different roads, as my car is slowly rolling towards or parked. I live around 20 minutes away from the event, but I made it home at my house around 4 hours since I got away from my friends, so around 6 something in the morning. When I woke up in my bed, I was covered in blood and scratches, but my car was in perfect condition, so I did not get into a crash. The following days I asked everyone I was with that night if they recall me doing anything, but nobody knew what happened or how I'm alive. Sleepwalking really is terrifying. I've had an extremely hard time going to sleep, and also have a small history of sleepwalking when I was younger. I'm not sure if I'm insomniac or not, but truthfully, the event was quite frightening. I used to live in the upstairs apartment at my uncle's house. The front door to the apartment was right next to a door that led to the attic. My door also only had a handle lock. One night something woke me up at around 3:30 a.m. I realized it sounded like footsteps and figured it was an animal and passed back out. The next night the same thing happened, but louder. It sounded like someone was stomping down the attic stairs and pounds on my front door. As you can imagine, I have never been so terrified in all my life. I called my buddy until he answered and stayed there for a few nights. Unfortunately, there's no real resolution to this story. I just hope that whatever it is eventually gets bored and goes away. I grew up in a household that I believe had a haunted house. The house was surprisingly large in Burnett, Texas. At the time that these stories were taking place, I was 6 years old. This house was a place that used to be a rodeo, and from what I have been told, I believe it's factual, because when I grew up in the house, there was a full-scale kiddie train in the backyard with a complete train track, the conductor's booth, and the cars for everyone to sit in. At night, sometimes my mother would hear noises and see the silhouette of a man in a cowboy hat running down the hallway. By the time the man's silhouette would get to the other end of the hallway, it would vanish. Due to the fact that I'd never dealt with this story personally, I did not take any stock in the supernatural until much later in life. This next story took place at a trailer home in Weir, Texas. This home is 2 driveways down from the granary that is part of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie film set. The truck from the original movie is still parked outside the granary. I was 13 at the time, and we lived on farmland and had roughly 37 goats and 2 guard dogs. There is a long strand of trees running along the length of a creek on the property, and a second row of trees running the same direction as the first, creating a fair-sized clearing at the back of the property. Just before running into a massive wooded area, we started having an issue shortly after we got the goats. That quickly took a turn for the worse. Over the course of 2 months, these goats began disappearing and getting picked off quickly. One day while I was outside walking down the creek, I walked to the clearing by the back of the property. The grass in the clearing was high. It came up to my waist, and I saw the bloated corpse of one of our goats laying on its side and a dog-like creature standing over it with its face down against the goat. It was still fairly far away, so I couldn't exactly see all of the creature, nor its features. But it was large, and had odd patches of grey and black fur. I charged full speed at it, and as I got closer, I looked up, and when it looked at me, its closest resemblance was a hyena. It didn't have a tail, its face seemed odd, and it ended up running away and disappearing somewhere. I couldn't see where it had disappeared to, and ended up leaving without taking a closer look at the goat. Looking back, to better depict this animal, its back was tall and came up to my chest, making it about 5 feet. That was the only time I ever saw this creature. My next story occurred when I was 16, at my current abode. My mum had married my stepdad previously that year, and I kept getting eerie vibes at the house the longer I stayed there. Plus, my older stepsister had told me about the poltergeist that would throw her books across the room and flip through the pages vehemently. One night I was relaxing in the game room and playing World of Warcraft by myself sitting in a comfortable chair, when the radio turned to static at exactly 3 a.m. The fact that the radio turned on wasn't as scary as the fact that the remote for it had gone missing prior to us moving there, and that we had never found it. I, without looking at the radio, stood up and walked directly towards the TV in front of me, and turned it on. I sat there uncomfortably, talking to my online friends until after 4 a.m., then quietly stood up, turned off the TV and radio, and went to bed. A few years later, I went to bed one night, still in the same house, at a decent hour and fell asleep on my back, face to the ceiling. I woke up at 3 a.m. on the dot with an uneasy feeling, and without blinking, immediately noticed a massive figure standing over me. For reference, to the left of my bed was a bookshelf that was built into the wall and ran from floor to the ceiling. This shadowy figure, which was darker than the darkness of the countryside, was about 6 inches from touching an 8-foot-tall ceiling with his head. I kept my eyes open for a long period of time because I had the feeling that if I blinked, I wouldn't see him again. I looked at him closely and held my quick, drying eyes open for about 15 to 20 seconds, just staring at this shadowy mass on the wall. He was tall, slender, and had what looked like a hood on his head, and the closer I looked, the more I realized that's where the eyes should have been. There was a darkness that was somehow darker than whatever dark substance the rest of him was made from. Everything about his eyes was somehow the darkest part of him. After that span of seconds passed, I blinked and could no longer see him, but had an uneasy feeling about being watched. I turned my back to him and went to sleep. The next year, my girlfriend at the time was sleeping over, just after we watched that movie, Paranormal Activity. And then we went to sleep next to each other. When we woke up, my girlfriend had 3 claw marks down her back for no apparent reason, and she told me she had a dream about a tall, hooded figure walk through the hallway and stop to stare at her from the hallway. I never actually told her about my incident with the shadowy figure. 2 years after this, on my 18th birthday, me and my mum went down to 6th Street in Austin, Texas to get my first tattoo done. After discovering that they wanted to charge me nearly 4 times as much as the guy from my hometown for far worse quality, we left and ended up giving a homeless dude my money because he was honest about going to drink himself silly for the last call. We ended up driving back to Georgetown, Texas, and on the way my mum suggested that we go ghost hunting with the phone application. We drove to a Pedernales Electrical Company right off IH-35 northbound in Ware, Texas. It was around 2:45 a.m. when we parked in their parking lot. We sat there trying to contact the spirit of a girl named Orange Socks, who was a Jane Doe whose name never got uncovered and whose body was found dumped in the riverbed across the street from where we were parked. The application is a combination of a radar and a chat box where the ghost talks to you. I wasn't sure how I felt about the app initially. It just seemed like a quirky thing that wouldn't work. I told my mum there weren't any ghosts out there, and she decided to drive down the dirt road leading from the Pernadales deeper into Ware. As she drove, I got uncomfortable and told her we should turn around and head home because there probably weren't any ghosts out there. As soon as I said that, the entire radar lit up green with hundreds of little orbs, and the text box began to work, translating like crazy. The application said frog, blanket, tennis, and I barely had enough time to roll my eyes at the building fear just before my mum stopped the car dead in a bridge that was barely a car's length long because a giant bullfrog about a foot wide hopped in front of the car. We both looked up and both saw what looked like a giant blanket flapping vigorously in the wind that didn't exist. Then we both witnessed it vanishing into nothing. My mum, being the supernatural white woman that she is, gets out the car with a flashlight, much like Fred from Scooby-Doo, and starts to investigate. I, being absolutely freaked out at this point in the premonition, threatened to leave my mother if she didn't get her ass back in the car and drive. She complied, and we left to get a Whataburger on the way to our house. My nerves start to calm down, and I start feeling more at ease about the whole thing. So we step outside so I can smoke a cigarette, and I look over to the parking lot while we're chatting and notice an oddly luminescent tennis ball perched casually at the corner of the parking lot. I start to get uneasy again and tell my mum we should leave. As we get in the car and drive towards the parking lot exit, there's another tennis ball right at the exit, then placed at the turning lane on our way home. Then placed on the right street until our next turn. These tennis balls led all the way up to the gate of our house, which unless you've been there before is very hard to find, and I usually have to help guests find the place. I'm panicking now because my mum and myself are the only two people at home right now. Everyone else had gone on a 3-hour trip to the coast for the weekend. My mum pulls up to the house and we get out. Me being more cautious than her, I get out slowly and walk behind her. There are 2 electrical boxes for this house, and they're nowhere near each other. And all the lights are usually left on when we're not at home because of how dark it gets. When I say this is the only time the power has cut off in over a decade, I can't make this up. The power in the entire house cut off, and I ran as hard as I could until the lights came back on. Thinking back, there was probably a spot directly under the giant oak tree by our front driveway that looks like a giant cement slab gravestone. It has writing on it. It's not readable from age and weathering. I drove this route the next day from my house back to Whataburger, and none of the tennis balls were there that had been the previous night. My parents tell me when I was a kid, I used to go to the bathroom in our new house and start laughing. They thought maybe I was playing in there or something, but when they checked on me, every time I was just staring into the bathtub, smiling and giggling like an idiot. My mum asked me finally what I was laughing at. I would say, the lady. I would frequently go into the bathroom and stare at the same spot in the bathtub and giggle and laugh with the lady who only I could see and hear. My parents were really freaked out at this point because the old woman who lived in our house before we moved died in the bathtub. I was too young to really remember doing it myself, but my mum still gets creeped out when she talks about it. Personally, I'm a little nervous that I may start seeing the lady someday. It was a typical evening at home, just like any other. I was in my sitting room engrossed in a book when a faint noise broke the silence. It was distant at first, barely registering in my ears, but as the seconds ticked by, it grew louder and more distinct. Curiosity piqued. I set my book aside and listened intently, trying to decipher the source of the sound. As I strained to make sense of the noise, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was the sound of creaking floorboards, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the basement. Fear coiled within me as I realized someone was inside our house, descending into the depths below. I tiptoed to my bedroom door, heart pounding in my chest, my senses heightened to an almost painful degree. I knew I had to investigate, to confront whatever threat lurked in the shadows. Steeling myself, I crept down the hallway, every step a calculated risk. Reaching the top of the stairs that led to the basement, I hesitated for a moment, my mind flooded with images of the unknown intruder. My hand tightened around the doorknob. Sweaty palms caused me to slip momentarily before gaining a firm grip. I took a deep breath, then slowly descended into the dimly lit abyss below. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a flickering light caught my attention. Panic surged through me as I realized that the intruder had found the light switch, bathing the basement in a pale glow. Shadows danced on the walls, distorting the already eerie surroundings. I cautiously followed the sound of the footsteps, my heart racing in my chest like a drumbeat of fear. The air grew colder, each breath a visible puff of mist, as if the presence of the intruder had sapped the warmth from the room. I pressed on, my nerves on edge, desperate to uncover the truth. Then, I saw them. A figure hunched over a workbench, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, his gloved hands busy with tools. My voice caught in my throat, a mix of fear and anger bubbling with me. "What are you doing here?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a whisper. The intruder froze, his head snapping to meet my gaze. I saw a glimmer of something sinister in his eyes, a hunger that sent a chill coursing through my veins. Without uttering a word, he lunged towards me, a knife glinting ominously in his hand. Adrenaline surged through me as I dodged his attack, instincts taking over. I sprinted back up the basement stairs, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing behind me. Fear fueled my speed. As I reached the safety of the main floor, slamming the basement door shut and bolting it. Breathless and trembling, I dialed the emergency services, reporting the break-in and describing the intruder as best I could. Minutes felt like hours as I anxiously awaited their arrival, my mind filled with the lingering image of the hooded man, his intent and motive still a mystery. The police arrived swiftly, combing through the house and the basement for any trace of the intruder, but he was gone, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of violation. My family and I took solace in the knowledge that we were safe, but the incident left an indelible mark on our lives. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me, a reminder of the fragility of our security and the darkness that can lurk beyond the familiar walls of home. It serves as a constant reminder to be vigilant, to trust our instincts, and prioritize our safety. We reinforced our home security, installing alarm systems and reinforced locks, determined to create a sanctuary free from the terrors of that night. But the memory of the hooded intruder still lingers in the back of my mind, an ever-present reminder of the fragility of our sense of security, and as a cautionary tale, a testament to the fact that danger could come knocking on our door when we least expect it. My grandfather died last year sometime when my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday night, so my son had seen him several times. My grandfather was a very quiet and proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get him to laugh. A few months after his funeral, my son, who liked to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started just laughing uncontrollably at about 2 a.m. So I get out of bed to see what's going on. I find my son sitting in the middle of the living room in the dark, laughing. "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" He just replies, "Papa, funny." I got a little nervous for some reason and went to pick him up and bring him to our room for the rest of the night. As I'm hauling him away, he says, "Bye, Papa," and blows a kiss at absolutely nothing I can see. I used to live on an old farm where the farmhands' quarters had been made into a rental apartment. We felt a strong and unwelcoming presence in the apartment at night, movements and such too, but the absolute impressive experience were the horse ghosts. After living there for some time, the owner renewed the old stables to be rented out for horses. Shortly after, 3 horses took residency there, and not long after we heard it for the first time. Around 8 p.m. we heard a horse walk into the courtyard. We both jumped up and ran out, believing a horse had gotten loose. I ran to the stables, and my ex ran out to look after the horse. When he rapidly pulled open the door to the stables, I saw 3 shocked horses looking back at me with a puzzled expression. My ex hadn't seen anything either, so we shrugged and went back to bed. The day after, it happened again. This time, we ran to the windows and looked out from both sides. Nothing, only the vaguely lit darkness. A couple of days went before we heard it again, and we got used to it and accepted it, as it was the spirit of a horse coming to visit its friends. It kept happening at random, though the time we lived there was always around 8 p.m. Even our neighbor, who was a stern non-spiritual mechanic, heard it and totally lost her mind when she found we heard it too. A while later we learned the farm had burned down many years ago, and we assumed the poor horse had perished. Then, when suddenly new horses arrived, it found some new friends. The co-worker's 4-year-old daughter always thought that the rattling of the water pipes in the kitchen cupboards were white wolves, and the sound always frightened her. One day she was sitting at the kitchen table and said, "Mum, the white wolves aren't bad, they're our friends." Her mum encouraged the idea by saying, "Yes, the white wolves are protecting us, they are our friends." Then her daughter added in, "They're our friends, but not the man who crawls on the floor and stands by my bed." A few years back I was sitting in my living room and felt a really cold chill just slowly roll down my shoulders and back. And then seconds later, feeling pressure on my right shoulder, like someone had just put their hand on there. I freaked out and ran to the kitchen, but as soon as I got near the table, my body completely froze, like it was unable to move. I felt the hand come back, but this time it was wrapped around my neck, and I was struggling to breathe. It felt like I was there for ages, but in reality was probably only 30 seconds, just spluttering and trying to breathe in. Once it went away, I ran straight up to my room and stayed under the covers of my bed. It was around 3:30, and I was freaked out by what happened earlier in the day. I had planned on trying to get some sleep, but as soon as I put my head down on the pillow, something crashed in the attic above my room. It was so loud, and the impact made my bed shake a little. Once again, that cold feeling came back, and I could feel my body tensing up, but not freezing like before, just scared, witless. I kept listening to see if I could hear a person or something up there, but nothing happened. I saw the time on the clock was 3:43 a.m. at this point, and decided to make a note of it. A little over 10 minutes later, I heard creaking from above my head, like slow but heavy footsteps, once again in the attic. Then a small thud followed by a scraping sound like a box being dragged across the floor. I covered my ears with my duvet at this point, just wanting it to be over so that I could get some rest and forget all about it. These thuds and scrapes kept happening, just over and over again, like someone was rearranging the things up there. I wondered if I was asleep, so I sent a text to my sister knowing that if I woke up and it was still there, I'd know I wasn't asleep. After about 20 minutes of the noises, they stopped, and I managed to fall asleep pretty quickly, probably because of the events that occurred. The next morning, I woke up to a text chime from my phone. It was my sister. It was a reply to the message I sent her earlier. I didn't bother responding, as I was too busy thinking about what happened. I looked over at the clock to see what time it was, only to see that it was still frozen at 3:43 a.m. It hadn't changed. I knew it was well into morning based off the light, so how did it still read that time? As you can imagine, I could feel the creepiness going up my spine, as I knew that 3 a.m. is known for the time of demonic activity or the witching hour. But I didn't want to jump straight to that conclusion. My sister came into my room about 10 minutes later and asked if I had any batteries, as her clock had stopped in the night too. I was beginning to panic now and asked her what time it stopped at. She said it was at 3:43 a.m. I checked the text I sent her, and you guessed it, 3:43 a.m. It was impossible that I'd sent her that at that time. As I know, it had been at least 20 minutes, if not more, between me checking the clock and texting her. I got straight out of bed and decided to investigate the attic. She saw me pulling down the ladder and asked what I was doing. I gave her a quick rundown of the incidents, the time, the text, and the noise I heard. She's not superstitious, but she was freaked out, so up into the attic I went. I got to the top of the ladder, switched on the light, and just froze. Not a single thing was out of place. Everything was exactly where it was meant to be. These kind of events have happened multiple times now. Every time my sister stops at 3:43 a.m. I came to realize after this had happened, about 2 or 3 times, that this only happened when I myself was up at 3:43 a.m. My sister and I have experimented to see if it happens when she wakes up, but it only happens to me. I was, and still am, completely stumped as to what the hell is going on. I think I may have annoyed some kind of entity in the house. So yeah, pretty spooky, and unexplainable if you ask me. But I'd be happy to hear what you make of these events. I have a 3-year-old who says some pretty strange stuff. Last night he goes, "Mummy, the very big man with the yellow eyes is looking at you." I look. There's nothing. I tell him there is no man, and he's make-believe. My son laughs. "Oh, he's hiding now." 2 minutes later. "Oh no, Mummy, you made him very mad. Now he says he'll come down to you when you're sleeping." 4 weeks ago he tells me, "I'm not going to be 4. I'm going to die, and you will put me down, down, down in the hole." I tell him that isn't true, and ask him who told him that. He gets quiet and goes, "The man told me, but I will be scared, so after 3 nights, you die too and come with me." Sheesh, as if I didn't have bad dreams already. It was 1989. Working as a technician, you kind of already see the stress. Coming home would be a blessing full of ease, having 1 kid at the time and being married to an industrious wife who made sure the house stayed neat and tidy, diapers changed, etc. I could say it was a huge relief. But what would make days like this greater were the walks in the large fields and woods that we had at a neighborhood park down the street and around the block. When we first moved here, I would occasionally go there for clearance, but that occasionally turned into additional after a couple of more stressful months. I would do the usual after I would reach the big field right before the entrance of the woods. I would take off my shirt/toes and lay down in the grass with my head facing the sky and let Mother Nature do her thing. Since you're hearing my story, then you know it's already a particular day for something horrible, but specifically something life-changing. Coming home after another painful and stressful day of work, I didn't even bother grabbing a quick snack. All I do this day is come home, kiss my wife and son, and tell my wife I will be back at 6 around usual, spending 3 minutes walking down the street talking to myself, and I would start my mind relaxing until I reached my destination and fully let my mind ease. I remember laying down on the grass and settling for 10 minutes to hear a faint whistle. 10 seconds after, I remember getting so tired I passed out, only to wake up to me being face down on the table at home. Looking out the window, I can see my wife outside with my son, before I lay my head back down to go to sleep again, only to wake up 10 seconds later in the grass in the exact same spot I was in before I closed my eyes for the first time. By this time, my heart already had started to pump rapidly, but the drowsiness always got the better side of me. And before I was able to move, I would find myself drifting off into a quick sleep to find myself in the same spot, in the same position on my kitchen table, lifting my head up trying to push myself up, as if I was paralyzed from actually getting onto my feet. I was always defeated by my eyes getting heavy and my head slamming down on the table, only to wake up in the same spot in the grass again. I couldn't get any type of process of what was happening and how I could stop it. The only process I could get at was how I was going to continue to live life. I couldn't keep count of how many times or how this had gone on, but I want to say for about 5 to 10 minutes before I woke up in a hospital bed with serious neck, head, back, and leg injuries. Something I noticed when I tried to shoot up is I was met with the paralyzation of heavy injuries and a nurse chiming in that I was awake. You would assume that I had been thrilled to the core and had every bit of confusion as to what the hell had happened. My heart was still pounding, not wanting to fall back asleep, hoping that the nightmare was over. It seemed like it was. The rest of this was a little blurry, until I had made a bit of recovery and was able to talk. At this time, my wife was on the bedside with me, and when my first words slipped out, I had asked her what happened, and why I was laying in total pain in the hospital bed. "You don't remember?" she replied. Supposedly, I had been in a fatal T-bone at an intersection coming home from a stressful day at work. The crash was so fatal, witnesses had thought I had died on the spot. But no, this was one of those miracles where the worst that happens to you as a driver is life-lasting impact injuries. But for me it was physical and mental scars. As you can guess, the mental scars got the best, which created questions as well as terrifying nightmares for me. I wasn't really able to get any sleep during this period of my life after the traumatic event, and was given sleeping pills as well as depression pills, anxiety pills to get my mental health better, which did hardly anything for me. With things like this, it's best to either try and give no thought to it, or just face it and find answers as to why such stuff happens and is part of your life. But for my job, sadly, it's disability. But it doesn't answer the questions as to what the hell happened. I can hardly keep a stable mind. I've tried to go through any simplification of what the hell I saw or hallucinated that day or how it even happened. Even the therapist was thrilled. To say the least, they're trained to be calm no matter what, but she had a look of horror on her face. It seemed like they tried their best to hold it, but I've told this story to other people, and you just know. If anyone has any explanation for what the hell happened to me, please, I'm all ears. I have been for years. When my son was about 3, he had an imaginary friend in his room, who he used to talk to all the time. He would tell us stories about things she would tell him, and we'd hear him chatting to her at bedtime. We thought it was pretty cute. After a few months, my son said he wasn't friends with her anymore, and we figured out he was over his phase of seeing her. So we were surprised to hear him still talking to her at night. Then he started not wanting to go to bed and having really bad dreams. At some point, we ended up asking a lot of questions about her. We assumed she was a little girl, but apparently she was 47. She lived in the wall, and he stopped being friends with her because she wanted him to call her mummy. Her name was something like Margaret, and she wanted him to come and live in the wall with her. He had told her he didn't want to talk to her anymore, and she wouldn't go away. We eventually moved and he stopped talking to her. Funny thing is, when I was pregnant with him living in the same house, I used to have dreams about a lady sitting at a dining table in our bedroom, except it was obviously a different era, and the room was not a bedroom at the time. The lady used to knit and make me listen to her, giving me parenting advice, while her 2 20-ish-year-old sons sat at the table quietly. I wonder what it all means. I had always been fascinated by the idea of UFOs, but I never thought I would actually see one. That all changed one summer night when I was out driving in the countryside. I had just come over a hill and was driving down a long, straight stretch of road when I saw something strange in the sky. At first I thought it was a shooting star or a comet, but as I got closer I realized it was something else entirely. It was a disc-shaped object, hovering silently in the air. It was massive, at least 100 feet in diameter, and it glowed with an otherworldly light. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out of my car, staring up at the object in amazement. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. As I watched, it started to move slowly at first and then with increasing speed. It flew a zigzag pattern, darting back and forth across the sky. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that this was no ordinary aircraft. It was something else entirely, something not of this world. As I stood there frozen with fear and wonder, the object suddenly stopped in mid-air. It hung there for a moment, as if it was studying me, before it shot off into the distance, disappearing in a flash of light. I stood there for a few minutes trying to process what I had just seen. I felt like I was in a daze, as if the world around me had shifted somehow. When I got back into my car and started driving again, I felt like I was in a dream. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the UFO sighting. I kept replaying it in my mind, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I scoured the news and the internet, looking for any reports of similar sightings in the area, but I found nothing. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started to feel like something was off. I started having strange, vivid, and terrifying nightmares about the UFO and the beings that may have piloted it. I started to feel like I was being watched, like there was something out there just beyond my field of vision. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, and that I was just imagining things, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. And then one night I woke up to a sound outside my window. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, but then I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, flirting across the yard. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran outside, scanned the darkness for any sign of the UFO, but there was nothing there, just the empty fields and distant stars. As I stood there, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing in around me, I knew that something had changed. The UFO had left its mark on me, and I would never be the same again. When I was merely 3 years old, I underwent a critical heart surgery due to my AVSD condition. During this procedure, they momentarily stopped my heart. It's an extraordinary experience for a young child, and when I regained consciousness, I made a remarkable statement. I went with 2 children to the sky, 1 boy, 1 girl. What makes this even more intriguing is the fact that my family isn't religious, and we had never discussed matters of faith or spirituality at that point. The significance lies in the fact that my mother had suffered 2 miscarriages before giving birth to me, a girl and a boy. This occurrence raised profound questions and stirs emotions within me. Was it just a product of my young imagination, or could there be a deeper connection at play, one that transcends our ordinary understanding? As you can imagine, the event remains etched in our family's collective memory, inviting contemplation about the mysteries of life and the unexplained phenomena that occasionally crosses our path. Have you ever grabbed your camera or phone to try and capture something that you could not see but felt? While looking through them, you discover that you were right on the money. There was something that showed up that you didn't or couldn't see with your eyes, or you were taking pictures of an event, or with family and friends, with no funny creepy vibes. When you find out that feeling, was your gut telling you that something was off or not right or just weird? It makes you question all the times that you felt that feeling, and wonder if they were an indication that there was something there unseen by your eyes. This is an experience I had when I was 27. In late September of 1996, I stayed with a friend. Her baby girl and my baby boy were born 1 day apart in June. She and I had been friends for 8 years. We had many mutual friends, and I had been to her house many times since high school, which had been her late parents' house and her childhood home. Her mum had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia young, in her early 40s, when we were in high school. Her dad kept her home until he could no longer care for her by himself, and she had 2 older brothers. The eldest moved out to go to college, then her elder brother was rarely home. When her mum passed away, shortly after my friend got married. The house went to her and her new husband. They updated it, moved in, had their daughter. Her husband worked for a coal mine and it was pretty far away and too far to commute back and forth home early every morning. So he got 1 3-day weekend off a month and then back to work. So it was just her and her daughter most of the time. She invited me and my son to stay over one night and I happily accepted. I was a single mum. My son's father passed away before he was born and he never saw him. I lived with my mum and her husband and was looking forward to a change of scenery and thought it would be good for my mum to have some time with him alone. We had a great time. Both babies were so cute and were both good-natured. She took lots of pictures of us all. We chatted and played with them, fed them, bathed them and put them to bed. We visited some places and when she said she was tired and going to bed, I wanted to wind down for a little bit so I stayed up a bit longer. After she went to her room, I checked on my son. I went to the living room and sat on the couch. I sat there alone, in the quiet. I had this funny, creepy feeling that I was being watched and got goosebumps. I told myself that I was being silly and that I was tired from lack of regular sleep. I shrugged it off and got up and ready to go to bed. We all slept through the night. The next morning we hung out and I stayed until about 4 p.m. It was nice. Before I left, she said we should take the pictures to be developed and would get 2 copies made and would let me know when she got them back. 2 weeks later, she called and said she had them and if I wanted to come by and get them. Then she said that she wanted to show me something in a few of the pictures and would not elaborate further, just that she and her husband wanted my opinion. I said I'd be there shortly. My mum let me leave my son with her. When I got there, I didn't pick up on anything until she opened the envelope from the picture developer. We were looking through them and they were so good. Then before she got to the last, she paused and told me that there was something in these pictures they couldn't figure out. I was curious. She seemed a bit hesitant and showed me the first of a series of 3 pictures she had saved for last. They had been taken one after another. I was sitting on her couch holding her daughter and she pointed out that there was something strange to the left-hand side of us. I looked at the picture and saw what I thought was a slight white blur to the right of us, a little about my shoulder. At first I thought her daughter or I moved slightly as she was taking it, or she moved it as she was taking it. She then showed me the next one. There was something that looked like a white transparent smoke or mist, and it was bigger than in the first picture. I squinted at it and tried to think about what it could be. We didn't smoke. No candles burning, no mist vaporizer. I then watched her pick up the last picture. My eyes widened when I saw what looked like something sitting on the couch beside us. It reminded me of ectoplasm from the movie Ghostbusters. It looked like an apparition was forming. It was milky white and translucent. It looked like it had a head with a skull-like face. It seemed like it was leaning in towards us with an arm that could have been a hand up to the side of the face, like it was resting its cheek against its hand, curled so the knuckle held it up, with the elbow sitting flat on a table, sitting and gazing at us. A head with a shoulder, its arm bent at the elbow, resting his chin on the bald hand. There was a bit of what looked like its upper torso. It looked like it had tried to form more but stopped at that point. It was facing us, the left side of its face to the camera. Its profile slightly turned, showing the right eye socket. I was stunned. Chills covered my body. My mind was trying to register this. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Her husband came into the kitchen, greeted me and saw my expression. They both felt the same way. We tried to come up with a plausible and rational explanation but could not. Then I remembered how I felt that night and told them about it. They were looking at me with looks of wide-eyed incredulity, but believed me. It showed up on their negatives too. I asked them if they ever felt that way. They both said they hadn't. Of course, he wasn't there a lot since they moved in, and this was her family home, and she felt comfortable there. It did not feel sinister, and it didn't last very long. It wasn't a black mass, it was white. I later found out she showed her older brothers copies of the pictures, and they had the same reaction. She asked them if they ever felt anything, watched them, or had any strange experience. Her brother, the middle child, said there was a ghost in the house and he saw it when he was a kid. I forget what else she found or if he elaborated more on it. If it had been evil or negative, I'm not sure if he would have told her. I'm not sure if he wouldn't tell her more to not freak her out, other than what she saw, and she was surprised by this. She never had experienced anything like this, nor had the elder brother. Of course, she was a bit unnerved. I've never had this happen to me before or since. So recently, my 3-year-old daughter has developed an intriguing belief about a phantom lady residing in our old house. It's a historic property over a century old that we moved into a few months ago and are currently renovating. The events leading up to her claims occurred last night when both she and her younger brother felt scared to enter the loft/living room area. Intrigued by her mention of the lady, I gently probed for more information. An increasingly peculiar conversation. I asked simple, unbiased questions while my daughter shared her insight. According to her, the lady in question resides within our home, wears a green dress, and is responsible for tidying up her toys. My daughter claims to have spotted her through a window, engaged in the act of picking up toys. Apparently this lady lives upstairs in the loft/attic area. When I asked her name, my daughter responded that she couldn't reveal it due to her potential anger. However, she considers the lady to be her friend, albeit someone who doesn't particularly like me or her mum. Okay. Initially, my mind leaped to the possibility of a secret resident within our house, given the tales associated with it. To alleviate my concerns, I took my German Shepherd up to the loft. Interestingly, our cat had previously displayed an aversion to going upstairs. The search was thorough, with every nook and cranny examined, but we found no signs of entry or any presence of an unknown person. My vigilant German Shepherd didn't show any signs of agitation and failed to detect scents. Her loyalty and protectiveness are well known, as she had previously thwarted a home invasion in our house, hence why I find it hard to believe that anyone could gain her favor without detection. Later on, we stumbled upon a black and white photograph of a woman in a dress. As it turns out, she was the wife of the original builder of the house dating back to the early 1900s. We remain uncertain whether her dress was green, and my daughter didn't recognize her from the photo. Regardless, the peculiar incident seemed to subdue, although I occasionally hear unexplainable footsteps during the night. My German Shepherd has also showed unease around certain areas of the house. I am skeptic to this, and do not embrace the notion of supernatural entities. One aspect remains unexplained, however. My daughter mentioned the lady in green, urging her to accompany her to the well. Curiously, my daughter isn't even aware of what a well is. Our property spans a significant area of 11.5 acres, with 9 acres comprising of woodland. 2 acres beyond our property line is an old, partially concealed well. I managed to take a glimpse inside, but it appeared mostly filled, making it impossible to discern anything with just a flashlight. Digging around isn't feasible since it doesn't fall within our property boundaries, though I do have a photograph of it. Twice now, I've had a weird experience in the same place, my grandma's attic. Once a few years ago, and just 5 minutes ago the second time. Let me start with the prequel. To give you an idea, my grandma has a house, and the attic is basically like a second floor over the whole house. It's filled with all sorts of things we dump up there that we no longer need. Tools, firewood, old toys from childhood. Also up there is a short chair and a coffee table. When I take them out of the attic to the balcony, it's my favorite place to smoke in the house. Tobacco, not weed. I like the view and the wind. Sometimes, though, I'm lazy to bring things out and smoke in the attic, just looking around at all the junk. One day I was going up there, and as soon as I stepped foot on the first step, I got a fight or flight response for seemingly no reason. It was the middle of the day, and I had been in the attic 1,000 times. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not a kid. But for some reason I was getting chills, and my heart was beating fast. As soon as I went up the last step, I stopped and looked around the attic. I had nothing to be afraid of, it's just instinct. I couldn't go into the attic without checking it out first, and I spent about 30 seconds looking into the attic in silence before the courage came back, and walked forward. While walking towards the table for some reason, I had the thought enter my brain that a demon is watching me right now. I instantly laughed it off and thought to myself, I'll show him who's boss. As soon as I finished that thought, I heard a loud shuffle, like someone's footsteps dragged onto the ground, and instantly I froze midway and looked into the direction where it came from. I spent at least a minute just looking, frozen, expecting a large rat or something to pop out from somewhere. When I finally got my courage back, as soon as I was about to continue to the table and finally do what I came for, another loud noise froze me. This time a distorted piano played. I kid you not, the most demonic, out-of-tune chord you could imagine, like the sound a horror movie producer would put on a jump scare. On cue, I of course immediately dashed towards the stairs and noped the hell out of there. I went downstairs, entered the room my family was in, and tried my best to pretend I wasn't running from a demon. My mother heard the piano. She thought I found my childhood toys and was fooling around with them. I went with that story and told her that surprisingly the batteries were still holding out. They must be good. I wasn't about to tell my family I seriously thought there was a demon in the attic. After I spent a few minutes downstairs, regaining my composure, I started to think about things rationally again. I felt ashamed that I got scared of nothing. I'm an adult, damn it. I picked up my small balls and went up there again, determined to find the piano and ease my mind forever. I went up immediately, walked up to the place where the sound came from, and picked up off the wall a big garbage bag filled with toys from my childhood. I started taking things out and found it, a cheap Chinese dingy toy piano. I tried pressing the keys but no sound came from them. I flipped it around, opened the battery compartment, and had a brain fart when I saw there were no batteries in it. I took it down with me, found some batteries and put them in and tried playing it. Still no sound. Unfortunately, I failed to ease my mind. Over the next few weeks, I spent quite some time reflecting on that incident. As time went on, I started rationalizing it more and more, thinking that maybe pianos like that make their final sound when their circuit board finally dies, kind of like parting words. Maybe the shuffle I heard was my own feet because of the fear it sounded like someone else's. The only thing I couldn't make sense of was how this piano had been in that garbage bag for 15 years and somehow found the energy without batteries to make a sound from its speakers, and a loud one at that. I even posted here at one point, hoping someone could ease my mind and offer an explanation. In the end, as time went on, I brushed it off and told myself, I'm no engineer, I don't know how currents and stuff work. There could be weird ways that it happened and it was just normal, and a coincidence with an explanation. I went to the attic countless times after, and nothing ever happened. No weird sounds, no unexplained paranoia, just peace and quiet. As it should be. Well, that is of course right until today. Recently we've been doing construction work on the house every weekend. I go up to the attic 20 times a day to fetch something or to have a smoke break. We finished the work and went to bed. Now before you accuse me of being a skeptic rationalizer, I try to keep an open mind. Recently, I've been getting into trying out astral projection. It's a nice little meditation, and I haven't succeeded yet, but the effects are quite trippy and it's fun. So I'm laying in bed, browsing the AP subreddit before I decide I'm going to go up and have one last cigarette before I go to bed. The front door is loud, and I don't smoke in the house, so I go to the attic. In the exact same way, as soon as I set foot on the first stair, I get this immense feeling of something is amiss. Now some years have passed since the last time this happened, and naturally my small balls have grown at least a bit, so I don't stop this time. Just went up and sat on my smoke table. I lit my cigarette, remember the last time this happened in the piano. Like any sane person, I started a monologue in my head to banish the potential ghost. My monologue continued until my cigarette went out. Here's a recreation. I don't know if there's demons up here or whatnot, but you can't spook me. I can't touch you right now, but I'm learning this technique that lets me come into your house. Trust me, tonight I'm going to kill you as revenge for when you scared me. This is your last chance to scare me, so go ahead and try. I put up my cigarette, quite amused of my little monologue, and here we go again. As soon as I finished my monologue and said, try me, a loud sound as something on my left drags across the floor. This time I caught it with my peripheral. As I turn around, a sack filled with dry sticks for the fireplace was moving across the floor, defying the laws of physics. Gravity can't do that, can't make it move that distance, especially when there's so much friction that it made a loud sound. I shot up and stayed fixated on the sack, convinced not to let a rat, for example, run away without me seeing it. It didn't move for a few seconds, so I went up to it, took all the sticks out, checked every corner of that thing. No rats inside. I put the sticks back, said out loud, "Don't touch that again." I said my piece already and I meant it. If there really was an evil entity up there, I'm gonna banish it. Although at that point, I was starting to feel like I was bluffing. I walked up to the stairs, but before I went down, I stopped and looked back at the attic. Although my knees were weak, arms heavy, and vomit on my sweater already, I wasn't going to give in to my fear. So I stared into the void for a few seconds to establish dominance. And again, as if a reply, the sack lightly got dragged. This time, just a little bit, for a split second, and I spent a few more seconds looking at it, then slowly went down the stairs with a confident, albeit shaky walk. Originally, I was going to go to bed, but the adrenaline got so high that I'm sitting on the toilet sharing this with all of you. I don't think I can ever rationalize this. It's just too many things on top of each other. The strong fight or flight before the event, the timing that makes this feel like a reply, the hard to explain sound and movement. I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, but I'd appreciate some guesses as to what could have happened. I'm now a believer and can't over-rationalize things by myself anymore. I don't know if this spirit is good or bad, so I won't make any extra measures right now. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I'm just going to go upstairs again in a moment to smoke one more cigarette and feel out the vibe. I had an imaginary friend called Fanny when I was a little girl. She was around my age and had a red and white dress and black pigtails, and for some reason was always in the bathroom. I'd scare my mum to death when I'd scream after she'd flushed the toilet. She'd ask what was wrong, and I'd always tell her she flushed Fanny down the toilet. She finally left one day when she surprisingly came to the grocery store with us. She never went anywhere other than my house with me, so I was excited. But as we left, I screamed again, scaring my mum, and said we had left Fanny at the store. My mum said she knew where we lived, so she'd find her way back, but she never did. During this time, my mum and little brother would always take a nap in the middle of the day. I could never sleep during the day, so I would stay awake and do whatever in my room. Every day when I was the only one awake, the toilet on the other side of the house in the game room would flush. It always frightened me. So one day I woke up my brother to witness it. He came and sat with me in the hall. It had already happened once, and it would always do so one more time, and I was hoping he would hear it. Sure enough, the toilet flushed all on its own on the other side of the house, and his eyes widened in disbelief when he heard it. I was so happy to have someone else hear it finally, and since he was with me, I had the courage to go check it out. He was terrified, but I had to at least look to see if someone else was there. No one else was, but the toilet water was moving gently, as it does after the flush, and the echo was still remaining. Looking back, it could have been Fanny. She had some weird obsession with the toilet, and it made sense that this would be her, since it was always the same time of day, when I was the only one awake to hear it. Of course, the flushing stopped after she left that day to the grocery store. I often wonder what happened to her. My husband, friend and I were taking a 2-week trip through the UK. All 3 of us are Christian. One of the nights we were staying in this flat in London, I had a dream that I was shaking myself awake in the dream. When my dream self woke me up, they pointed to a dark corner to the right of me and said, "You need to pray. There's a demon in that corner." I woke up my husband and told him what I had dreamed. I said, "Let's not tell our friend because it could really freak her out, and maybe I just ate some bad food." Well, the next morning our friend comes into our room, sits on our bed and says, "Guys, I think we really need to pray. I had this dream where there was a demon in the corner there, and proceeds to point to the same corner I had dreamt about. Still gives me shivers to this day. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, I found myself lying next to my dad during a nap. Even though I wasn't particularly keen on napping myself, during that quiet moment, something peculiar happened. I casually turned to my dad and said, "Hey Dad, Grandpa's here." This statement caught my dad off guard, because he had never shared much about his own father, who had sadly passed away when he was quite young. I, however, seemed to possess knowledge beyond what my dad had ever disclosed, as I confidently replied, "It's Grandpa Peter, Dad. You know his name." This revelation left my father deeply intrigued and concerned. Curiosity piqued my dad, and he couldn't help but ask, "Well, if he's really here, what does he want?" Without hesitation, I responded, "He wants to make pie, Dad." The details of what followed became hazy in my memory, but my dad proceeded to recount to me how he and his dad used to make mud pies together. This recollection stirred up a mixture of emotions within him, leaving an indelible mark on his heart. That's all I could recall, apart from my vibrant imaginary friend who accompanied me during that period. It was a quiet night in my small town, and I was coming home from a late shift at work. As I walked towards my apartment complex, I noticed 2 children standing at the entrance. They looked to be around 10 or 11 years old, and they were dressed in old-fashioned clothing that seemed out of place. As I got closer, I saw their eyes were completely black. It was like looking into an endless void, and it made me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore them and walk past, but they called out to me in unison. "Excuse me, sir. Can you help me? We're lost and need to call our parents." Their voices were soft and innocent, but something about them made my skin crawl. I turned to face them, and noticed that their faces were unnaturally pale, with no hint of emotion or expression. I hesitated, but something about their plea made me feel like I had to help them. I asked them where their parents lived, and they gave me an address that was on the other side of town. It seemed like a strange place for 2 young children to be wandering around at night, but I decided to take them to a nearby payphone to call their parents. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about these children. They didn't seem to blink, and their movements were almost robotic. The air around us felt heavy and oppressive, like a storm was brewing. When we arrived at the payphone, I handed them the receiver and watched as they dialed the number they had given me. But as they spoke, I noticed that their words were garbled and distorted, like they were speaking a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to leave, but as I did, one of the children grabbed my arm. Their grip was surprisingly strong and I couldn't break free. "Please, sir, we need your help. Let us into your car." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right and I knew it. I struggled to break free from their grip, but it was like trying to move through quicksand. That's when I heard a voice in my head, a voice that wasn't my own. "Don't let them in," it whispered. "Don't look in their eyes." With a burst of strength, I pulled away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back until I was safely inside my apartment complex. The next day I asked around about the children, but no one had seen or heard anything. It was like they never existed. But I knew the truth. I had come face to face with the black-eyed children, and I had narrowly escaped their grasp. The memory of their empty, soulless eyes still haunts me to this day. My brother endured a tumultuous and emotionally draining divorce following 2 years of marriage and the birth of 2 beautiful children. The aftermath of the separation was particularly challenging, especially when an unsettling incident occurred involving my niece at her daycare. Out of the blue, she uttered these chilling words, "My mummy is dead in the woods." Understandably, the daycare staff were utterly perplexed and concerned, prompting them to immediately contact my brother. They urgently requested his presence to address the distressing revelation made by my young niece. Filled with a mixture of worry and curiosity, my brother approached her gently, seeking an explanation for such a haunting statement. With an air of innocence, my niece calmly replied, "Because I saw her there." What made this incident even more unsettling was the fact that her mother had vanished without a trace approximately a month prior to this event. She had chosen to elope with a man of questionable character, leaving behind a trail of confusion and unanswered questions. Despite our tireless efforts, we were left in the dark, clueless about her whereabouts. A year has elapsed since the eerie incident. It continues to weigh heavily on our minds. At the time, my niece was merely 4 years old, making it difficult to ascertain the true nature of her words. Could she have stumbled upon something traumatic? Or was her imagination merely playing tricks on her tender mind? The uncertainty surrounding her mother's disappearance casts an eerie shadow over the incident, fueling our concerns and heightening the mystery. My family has made countless attempts to locate my brother's ex-wife, reaching out to various authorities and conducting thorough investigations. However, all our efforts have been thus proved futile, leaving us in a state of perpetual uncertainty. I had just moved to Laughlin, Nevada, to work in a casino. I got an apartment not far away. Everything was going well when one night, on the crap table, a box man I hadn't worked with yet came and sat box. I literally was instantly in love, with a crazy, indescribable attraction. He spoke to me, but mostly turned his chair toward third base. I was on second base. He was supposed to watch the whole table. This went on for weeks. I'd catch him looking at me from other pits. One night, all the dealers were up in the bar after everything, so I went too. We talked that night till daybreak. He said the moment he walked up to the table, the first time he saw me, the attraction was so intense it practically made him fall into the box chair. He couldn't look my way, or he couldn't do his job at all. We started dating. Eventually he came to my apartment, where I said I had some strange things happening with the lights going on. My stepdad had died a few years before, and I'd say, "Bob, please turn the lights back on," and on they would pop. I always assumed it was my stepdad checking on me, being so far from home and family. So we were done with dinner, having wine and getting loose, and I start telling my new boyfriend about the light thing. He says he doesn't believe in that kind of thing. Well, I then say out loud, "Hey Bob, can you turn..." Bam, the lights come back on. I swear it almost ruined the date. We move in together because we slept together that night, and I on the pill got pregnant first time. A few months later, he buys a house for all of us. Now the new house, Bob has a new trick. He likes to turn the channel to a completely random one a lot. One day, going through my boyfriend's stuff he had in his storage, he shows me his family genealogy book. I say, "Ooh," and grab it. Well, his family is all from the exact town in Canada that my dad was born, with tons of family still there. Some of my boyfriend's sister and brothers went to the school with my family members. This leads to a discussion about how it always felt like we were being pushed together. And getting pregnant like that felt like someone wanted to make sure we didn't miss the cues about our destiny. He had moved from Canada to Laughlin, and I came from Washington to Laughlin to find him. After the baby was born, we would see a figure walking down the hall to check on the baby. We've moved to a few states since then, but there's still occasionally things going on, like a figure in the hallway, but more so with our kid. She's 22 now. Bob still checks in on me, and now he checks in on the daughter. That's our ghostly love story. I had an unsettling experience with what I believe was a paranormal entity at my previous apartment. At the time, my son was just a toddler and would often talk about two individuals and their dog. The strange thing was I had no knowledge of who these people were. Intrigued, I decided to investigate further by reaching out to his father and childminder, but neither of them recognized the names. I even took to Facebook asking friends if they knew anything about these mysterious figures, but again, I was stonewalled. As time went on, my son's interactions with these enigmatic beings became even more peculiar. He would leave toys out, seemingly intended for the dog to play with. Initially, I dismissed it as a figment of his imagination, assuming he had picked up the names from some old-timey source and simply grew fond of them. Eventually, we moved out of that apartment, and to my surprise, my son never mentioned them again. A few years later, driven by curiosity, I decided to delve into my family history by signing up for a family heritage website. Among the various records available, I stumbled upon the 1939 register for the United Kingdom and decided to search for my old address. To my astonishment, there, listed on the census, were the exact names my son had mentioned years ago. Those same old-timey names that had perplexed me for so long. Almost 30 years ago, I was spending several months in Western Europe and staying in a former monastery built in the 17th century. Very early on during my stay, I was warned by one of the girls who worked there to stay away from certain areas of the building, or at least not to go there by myself. When I asked why, she said none of them ever went there alone, because often they would see black figures staring at them from the end of the hallway. While I have always loved ghost stories, I have never seen one and wasn't too bothered by what she told me. In fact, I actually wanted to go to that area to see if I could catch something. Spoiler alert, I never saw anything there or anywhere else in the building. But that didn't mean nothing happened. I spent several months in there, but it was only after I left that I started to realize something was wrong. Many things happened there, but if I were to tell you all of them, I'd have a book. You see, I changed while I was there. I started hearing my name being called constantly by a voice I didn't recognize. Not only that, I couldn't even tell if it was male or female. Nothing else was said, only my name called. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. Oftentimes, I would hear people playing billiards, and I would head out to see where the billiard table was, only to find the room deserted and the balls put away, so no one had been playing. As soon as I walked away, I would almost immediately hear the sound of play, which I knew couldn't be so, as I had been there moments before. Funny thing is that at the time I didn't think anything of it. Not of my name being called, not of the phantom billiard game. The attic in the building was huge, and it had been turned into a library. There was a brand new heating system and heavy new insulation installed too. I would go there to get away from people and to read. At first there was nothing unusual, and I could be there for hours with no one else bothering me. But soon that would change. I started feeling as if someone was standing behind me, but I looked everywhere and no one was there. Soon I started hearing strange knocking noises behind me, and the room became so cold I could see my own breathing steaming. I checked the heat, and it was fine. But I felt more and more uncomfortable there. I felt unwelcome. But I still went there until one day, when I went up the stairs, and even though it was open, I felt I was unable to pass the threshold. There was nothing blocking my way. And yet, I couldn't pass no matter how hard I pushed. I tried for about 10 minutes and finally gave up. I never went into the attic again. Weird thing about this place, it was the place where I never heard my name being called. I could probably write a book, like I said, about all the experiences that happened. The thing is, I never wanted to leave. I left the place 30 years ago, and although I didn't hear my name being called, I know it wants me to go back. It just sits there, waiting. I live in a remarkable 300-year-old house that exudes a rich tapestry of history. Within its aged walls, tales of the past intertwine with the present, lending an air of mystery and intrigue to our everyday lives. One particular night stands out vividly in my memory. When I was putting my young son to bed, he was around 1.5 years old. As I left his room, I distinctly remember switching off the light, making sure he'd sleep peacefully. However, the tranquility was disrupted when I awoke in the middle of the night to find the room illuminated once again. As you can imagine, confusion washed over me as I ventured back into my son's room. Surprised, I find him joyfully bouncing up and down on his mattress, laughing wildly. With a sense of bewilderment, I ask how the light was on. He simply points towards the switch and says, "The man, the man." The inexplicable nature of the sensation left me grasping for answers, but I simply turned it off and dismissed it as an anomaly. However, the enigma continued to unfold. A month later, once again, in the depths of the night, I found myself drawn to my son's room by the ethereal glow of the light. In a state of déjà vu, I entered the space to find my son, still in his crib, pointing at the switch and uttering those haunting words. The man turned it on." A chill ran down my spine as I struggled to comprehend the presence that seemed to manifest itself through the innocent eyes of my child. As if these encounters alone were not enough, the house had more inexplicable tales to share, as on another occasion while occupied in the kitchen, I was abruptly startled by a creaking noise echoing through the corridors. Instinctively, my gaze shifted towards the staircase, only to catch a fleeting glimpse of a naked girl running up the steps. My heart raced as I followed in pursuit, hoping to unravel the mystery. Yet as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished around a corner, leaving me bewildered and yearning for answers. To this day, such occurrences continue to grace our lives sporadically. Their origins and purpose remain shrouded in the enigmatic ambience of our historic home. I had a dream of a not-so-close university friend dying in a car accident. I met him the next day. We had an exam. He was laughing about how his arsehole friend lied to him. They were all going to travel to a seaside town, but left him to force him to attend his exam. A few minutes later, someone called him. These guys got into a car crash, and they all perished in the accident. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend called Sarah. I did literally everything with her, from spoon-feeding my food to thin air as if we were eating together, to telling her we were going to be late for school. My family thought I was just doing dumb kid stuff, but one day, my sister came and asked me what my imaginary friend looked like. From what I can remember, I said she had curly hair, a long lacy dress, a ribbon headband and long socks, among other little details. My sister started freaking the hell out, and I got so scared I reflectively slapped her in the face. Turns out, she had been taking pictures with my stuffed toys in the background, and a figure of a young girl ended up in the picture somewhere. I had never seen the picture before she mentioned it, and I never told her before that what she looked like, but it matched my description perfectly. We unfortunately don't have the snap anymore, but we all remember it happened because everyone in my family still talks about it to this day. They say she showed up in a family photo once too. It's a shame I can't remember if I was genuinely playing with a girl I couldn't actually see, or if I was, like, childish bluffing. I guess I'll never know at this point. I checked into the old hotel on the outskirts of town, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. But as soon as I stepped into my room, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick and heavy, and a chill ran down my spine. The room was small and musty, with faded wallpaper and creaky floorboards. But the worst part were the windows. It overlooked the back alley of the hotel, where the dumpsters and trash bins were kept. The smell of rotting food and garbage wafted in through the window, making me feel sick to my stomach. I tried to ignore this feeling and settled down into bed. But as I drifted off to sleep, I was awoken by the sound of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing around the room. But when I opened my eyes, there was no one there. The footsteps continued through the night and I barely slept a wink, but the worst was yet to come. As morning dawned, I got up to take a shower, but as I turned on the water, I saw a figure in the steam. It was the ghostly image of a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes and her hair was wet and matted. She stared at me for a moment before vanishing into the mist. I tried to shake off the experience and went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast, but as I ate, I noticed that everyone around me was acting strange. They were whispering and looking over their shoulders, as if they were afraid of something. I asked the waiter what was going on, and he told me the story of the young woman I had seen in the shower. She had been a guest at the hotel many years ago and had been murdered in her room by her jealous lover. Her ghost had haunted the hotel ever since, terrorizing anyone who stayed there. I was terrified and couldn't wait to leave the hotel, but as I packed my bags, I felt a cold breath on my neck. When I turned around, I saw the ghostly figure of the young woman standing behind me. She stared at me with her wide eyes, and I knew I had to leave. I ran out of the hotel as fast as I could, never looking back. I knew I would never forget the terror I had experienced in that haunted hotel. The memory of the smell of garbage and feeling of being watched from the alleyway window would haunt me forever. When I was very young, my parents were divorced, and unfortunately my dad committed suicide. After his passing, my mum, sister and I went to his house to gather personal belongings that we wanted to keep. This day in particular is etched vividly in my memory because as we entered the house, the living room and the front looked drastically different. There was new furniture, unfamiliar decor, and I distinctly recall seeing an Indian family engrossed in watching TV, leading me to believe that the new owners had already moved in. Several years later, I casually mentioned this incident to my mum, only to be surprised by her response. She informed me that no one was present in the house at that time, and it was completely empty. Strangely enough, a family matching the description I had given did move in shortly afterwards, despite never having met them. Every single time I walked by my sisters in my room, I saw two people. A small young boy, a taller but still young girl about the same height as me, and I was 8. The boy looked about 3 or 4. I thought it was creepy, but that I was just seeing things. The kids were intrusive though, because when me and my mum were picking up my sister, they were appearing on the rooftops. This story is different, however, because my mum did believe me. One day, they just disappeared. When I was around 10 years old, I had a sleepover at my friend's house. It was late at night, and my friend went to the bathroom. Seizing the opportunity for a good scare, I decided to hide in the hallway just outside the bathroom door. As I waited, I could hear my friend talking inside, so I curiously peeked through the crack in the door. What I saw still sends shivers down my spine. Inside the bathroom, my friend stood at the sink with her back to me, engaged in a conversation with a little girl who appeared to be our age. The girl had long brown hair and was wearing a flowing white nightgown. She stood beside my friend, also with her back to me, facing the mirror above the sink. The sight chilled me to the core, and I was overcome with a wave of unease, unsure of what to do. I quietly retreated back to my friend's bedroom. When my friend returned, I couldn't resist asking her who she'd been talking to in the bathroom. To my surprise, she seemed puzzled by my question and had no recollection of conversing with anyone. Feeling unsettled, I decided not to bring the incident up again, but it has remained etched in my memory over the years. Even now in my late 20s, I occasionally find myself pondering that same inexplicable encounter. I was 13 years old at the time, and living with my mum and stepdad in their 250-ish-year-old house. I had fallen asleep in the basement, but just to be clear, it's not what you're picturing. Their basement, while eerie, had a couple of big couches and a large TV. Definitely a leisure room. I woke up at one point in the middle of the night and couldn't move at all. My entire body was frozen except for my eyes, which were frantically flying around. I know this is standard sleep paralysis, and I've had it happen more times than I can count, but here is where it's got worse than usual. Their house was an old townhome in the city, narrow and very long, extending back. So I'm there on the couch in the middle of the night, completely frozen and unable to move, which is terrifying enough and horribly unsettling. And then down the hallway towards the back of the house is very dark because my mum had turned off the corridor light and I could barely make out the back stairs. And I saw a figure walking towards me, a woman middle-aged at most, walking slowly and directly to me. Her face obscured by shadow, and I could only make out the faintest linen pants and blouse. Next thing I know, I felt hands closing around my throat and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. But I was screaming in my head for what felt like an hour. Suddenly I could feel my limbs again and shot up off the couch. Not 5 seconds later, I was sprinting upstairs to my bedroom, too afraid to look behind me. And I never went back to that basement alone until I was an adult. And even then, it still creeps me out. When I was a young child, around 4 to 5 years old, I used to experience panic attacks that resolved around a perplexing thought: the idea that our existence wasn't real. I couldn't quite grasp what alternative reality I believed in, but I had an overwhelming sensation that we were merely trapped within a dream. I vividly recall waking up in the middle of the night, gripped by fear, calling out to my mother, desperate for the reassurance that our world was indeed genuine. These episodes persisted throughout my teenage years and well into my 20s, where I would frequently be overcome by panic, convinced that I had already lived through the present moment and that I was much older, or worse yet, that I had already died. It's difficult to articulate the complexities of these experiences, but I wonder if anyone else can relate to this profound confusion and anxiety I felt. Does anyone else share similar thoughts or emotions? It's a challenging phenomenon to put into words, yet finding understanding and connection would provide some solace. I was at work one day, and me and my colleague went for a cigarette. When we came back, we had a few minutes left and decided to take the elevator to the canteen. All the way down the hall, there was a woman walking about 10 feet ahead of us. The lift door opened. Anyway, this lady walks into the lift but does not turn around, and the lift doors start to close. At this point, wanting to get into that lift to not let any further time pass, I run up to the button and pressed it in order for the lift doors to open before it starts going down. They begin to open again. And when the lift doors are fully open, my colleague and I walk in, and the lady was gone. We got to it before the doors closed fully, and there's nowhere she could have gone, in broad daylight. I decided not to work evenings there anymore after this creepy occurrence. During my childhood, I had an imaginary friend who left a lasting impression on my memory. He was a tall, older man with a beer gut and a receding hairline and grey hair. Interestingly, my mum would often mention my fear of the man upstairs. If I ever caught sight of him, I instinctively kept my distance, feeling a sense of unease. It frustrated me that no one else could perceive his presence but me. As it turns out, a man did pass away in that very house. Reflecting on those memories, a sense of discomfort arises when I think about this imaginary companion. There was something about him that gave me unsettling vibes, as if he had a predatory nature and always sought to be close to me. It's worth mentioning that my mum shares a belief in the paranormal and believed me when I told her. We also come from a military family and were frequently located, so regrettably the choice of our living environment was beyond our control. But I'm glad when we left to finally be rid of the phantom intruder. It was a rainy night, and I was walking home from the underground station. The streets were deserted, and the only sound was the gentle patter of rain on the pavement. As I made my way down the quiet street, I noticed a woman walking a few steps behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I turned the corner onto my street, she was still there keeping pace with me. I tried to speed up and lose her, but every time I looked back, she was still following me. I couldn't get a good look at her face, but her long, black coat and wild, unkempt hair make her look eerie and out of place. As we walked past a dimly lit alleyway, the woman suddenly stepped forward and called out to me. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a raspy voice. "Can you help me? I'm lost, and I need directions." I hesitated for a moment, but then I realized I had no choice. I approached her cautiously and asked her where she needed to go. She gave me an address that was on the other side of the city. I gave her directions, hoping to end the encounter as quickly as possible, but as we walked I noticed that she kept looking over her shoulder as if she was being followed. I couldn't see anyone else around, but her behavior made me feel uneasy. We turned onto a quiet street with a few dimly lit streetlights, and the rain started to pour down harder. Suddenly one of the streetlights began to blink on and off, casting eerie shadows on the wet pavement. The woman looked up at the streetlight and turned back to me with a strange expression on her face. "Thank you for your help," she said in a low voice. "I'll be on my way now." I breathed a sigh of relief as she walked away, but as I turned to go in the opposite direction, I saw her disappear down a dark alleyway. I didn't want to get involved any further, so I quickened my pace and tried to put the strange encounter behind me. But as I walked down the deserted street, I realized that the woman was following me again. I could hear the sound of her footsteps growing closer and closer, and when I turned to confront her, I saw her standing in the rain with her wild hair plastered to her face. As she got closer, I could see her eyes seemed to glow in the dark, and her face, pale, looked even more gaunt and terrifying. I didn't want to stick around to find out what she wanted, so I ran as fast as I could back to my house. The memory of that night still haunts me. I don't know who or what that woman was, but the thought of her following me from the underground station through the dark alleyway and into the rain still sends shivers down my spine. I had an imaginary friend of the name of Jack when I was 3 years old. He was like a blank slate of human being, and at times just a massive shadow with yellow eyes. I remember he was my friend, and I would talk to him, but I don't think he ever spoke to me. When I was asked where he would sleep, I would say he was lying on the floor completely stiff, and there were times when I would see the mass and eyes move behind doors, and I would yell that he was scaring me. I don't think he would ever harm me, but it always felt to me like he was some pale imitation of a human being. Who knows what he really was? I'm fairly into fitness, and especially at the time of this first dream. I was working at a supplement store, and I had just purchased a new pre-workout with my generous staff discount. It had unapproved ingredients in it that are now banned, and I was sure this was messing up my sleep. Another customer who had become a friend of sorts had been taking it well, and we had both stopped taking it a week apart due to night terrors. But I'm still unsure if this has anything to do with my semi-frequent sleep paralysis dreams. I was living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment at this time. It starts off as a typical sleep paralysis episode. Heavy chest, feeling like I can't move or speak, and I feel like a presence is in my room. I finally opened my eyes, or so I thought. To the right of me, standing next to the bed, I see a small boy. He looked, well, dead. He had black around his eyes and an expression of complete emptiness. No emotion. I woke up and really opened my eyes. I still don't know if they were open to begin with or not. All of my sleep paralysis dreams felt this way. I never knew if my eyes are open, half open, or completely closed, but I always make out my surroundings exactly how they are. Not too long after this happened, another night, I felt the same presence in my living room. I had fallen asleep on the couch and saw what appeared like a dark shadow move from one end of the living room to the other. I couldn't move and tried my hardest to get a better view of it, but I simply couldn't. Shortly after, I heard a voice say something from the bathroom that I couldn't make out, which takes me to the next experience, which is by far the most terrifying. Not long after the first couple of episodes, my family and I headed to Dolphin Point, accompanied by my now fiancé, a holiday destination about a couple of hours from where I live. The first night we all played some board games, and after a while we retired for the night and got ready for bed. Not long after I fell asleep, I was again in a state of paralysis, but I could not see the room we were in. An old beachside shack with a few rooms. In a panicked state, I noticed a dark, shadowy cloud above the end of the bed. I freaked out to say the least and tried to wake up. My vision turned towards my fiancée while squirming to wake up, and then I hear her whisper to me, "Help me." She was facing me while she said this. This is when I realized, oh my god, is she in trouble? Is something here? I tried to scream but only managed to get out a faint, My fiancé realized I was having a nightmare and shook me awake. I woke up and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she says. The strange part of it all was she told me she wasn't even facing me while she was sleeping. How could I see this room in my sleep without any prior visits to this place? Strange. This is why I wonder if I open my eyes during these episodes. Lately I've been having similar things happen to me before I sleep. Hearing loud knocking on what sounds like a large door. I awake to no noise. What sounds like a train speeding towards me at its peak, but I wake up to silence. I have dreams like Inception, as funny as that sounds. I will wake up in the exact spot I'm sleeping in, but still in the dream. To the point I don't know if I'm dreaming or not. I can't say I'm unhappy about my dreams. Sometimes I'm able to control them and have the ability to do what I like. I've flown through an empty black void. I've had many lucid dreams, some terrifying and others not so much, and wonder if at times I'm losing my mind. But I certainly hope not. I want to blame these occurrences on an over-imaginative mind, but I'm never quite sure. I had two imaginary friends when I was a kid, Birdie and Boy. Boy was not there. Birdie was 12 foot and went everywhere with me. Between 6 or 8, he just walked out the back door when I'd finished my food. He had a smell, had energy, and would have to crouch when he was inside. He was warm and felt warm and damp when he was close and was silent. When he walked, he would have his wings slump aside his wide, thumpy body. He had overalls on, big chicken-like feet that were worn down. His eyes were small and black, beaky, and always shut. I don't know where he came from or where he went. He was always just there. As I got older, I explained to my folks that Boy was never up, but Birdie was there. Not so much a human or dog as something else. I never spoke to him. He never spoke to me. He just watched as we would take things in together. I don't find it strange or scary. I'm 30 now and miss him. I wonder if I'll see him walking one day. Maybe when I'm closer to death. Either way, I hope all's good with you, my friend. Back when I was around 9, I was at my grandparents' house for Christmas. We always stay overnight there on Christmas Eve. My grandparents, dad, and sister all got their own bedrooms, but I was stuck with a cot in the hallway of the basement. I remember waking up that night completely paralyzed. I could feel something large and heavy breathing on my back. My dad, who's a firm believer in the paranormal, said it was probably just the ghost of his old cat Onyx. A few months later, I'm staying at the grandparents' house again because I have a doctor's appointment in the city. This time, I get to sleep in the basement bedroom instead of the cot in the basement hallway. I assumed what had happened at Christmas was just my extreme fear of the dark, giving me an incredibly vivid dream, so I slept with the lamp on in the bedroom. Later that night, even with the lamp on, I wake up, again, paralyzed, back to the open closet, and feel something lay down next to me and start slowly stroking my back. Even now, I don't really know what it was. People have told me it sounds like classic sleep paralysis, but I'm not so sure. What do you guys think? When I was 5 or 6, I was playing in the backyard and saw something move by a bush. I went to look and saw the bush move, but could not see an animal in it. As I got closer, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What I thought were branches of the bush were spider legs. The spider was about half the size of the bush, and it was shaking the bush. The bush must have been at least 4 feet wide. My first thought was that it was impossible. Spiders didn't grow that big. So I got even closer and saw the damn legs move towards me. That was it. I went running into the house to call my parents. My dad thought I was talking about a spider the size of an adult hand, but I said no, its legs are black or brown, and it's almost as big as the bush. He and I looked, and it wasn't there anymore, just branches and a gap in the area of the bush where I swear I saw the spider. Never saw anything like that again. I've tried looking online, but the best way I can describe it is like a Japanese crab spider, but I never had a good look at the body, just the legs. It was one hell of a disturbing memory. I was talking with a medium about some life choices I'd made in the past. I had mentioned to the person that I had met a shady person when I was in high school that somehow knew about me, and basically all the things I wanted to have in life. Needless to say, they were not good things to pursue despite the ends, and it would involve me in a life of crime, shady dealings, and a string of other things that I certainly don't regret getting myself into. In real life, I turned the guy down and went my way, and never saw that person again. So I looked at the median and asked, "So, I don't regret choosing this path, but I would like to ask, what would have happened if I chose to follow this guy instead of walk away from him? I like to believe that I am set far enough away from this event that I had proven my point now, that clearly I did not choose to follow him. But since you're here, what can you tell me would have happened to me?" It was a very tempting offer after all, not gonna lie. The medium sat for a few moments and gave me a straightforward response. "You would not have lived to see your 27th birthday." As such, this answer threw me off. It was not really the answer that I was expecting to hear from someone like this. It honestly did not surprise me a whole lot. Back when I had this experience in high school, I had a thought enter my mind at the time that said something like this: "You can do whatever you want. You're the age now where you can do whatever you want and mum and dad can't stop you. Just remember one thing. When you go into an operation like this, there's no backing out." I immediately imagined myself trying to back out as I shook the devil's hand, and how no matter where I turned, they were always in pursuit or looking for me. I would have had to live this life of a nomad, never staying in one spot, lying about my identity, and leaving whenever things got shady. I couldn't see my family or friends again, and if I did try to contact them, I would be found, and something terrible would happen. I would have to be all in, if that's what I wanted to do. No bail. But back to the present of me talking to this guy. That answer always kind of stuck to me. It probably made sense that I wouldn't have lasted long and got hooked on drugs or probably got some kind of disease. Fast forward a few weeks and I had a dream. It was probably one of the scariest dreams I would ever have. And considering that I usually have dreams where I die, and a lot of them are nightmares, I hope this has some credibility to it. It was one of those dreams where I knew what was going to happen before anything happened, almost like I had already gone through the dream once, and I was going through the whole thing again. I found myself exiting a car and walking up to a target house. It was my first assignment. My boss had told me that if I did this well, I would be accepted into their group, and if I did more assignments, I would earn privileges. For those of you not getting the cues, it means I had to kill whoever was in the house. I reluctantly walked up to the front door, knowing what I had to do. This is where it all starts, I thought to myself in the dream. As I rang the doorbell to get inside, I felt odd to say the least. I knew what I was doing was wrong and didn't really want to go through with it, but I felt compelled to do it since it technically already happened, and I was only replaying what already happened before. My feet were heavy, my arms were stiff. I took a breath and blew away the anxiety, and calmed down before I made a move. I could not quite get over how oddly familiar everything around me was. Yes, I have lived through it before, but even the first time going through it was somehow familiar. The door opened and an unfamiliar face showed itself to me. An older man in his 60s. I was about to ask if I could enter but was interrupted by the man as he nearly collapsed with the joy of seeing me, hugged me and invited me in, and ushered me into the living room, where he shouted to his wife, who was also in the house, and audibly happy to hear of my arrival too. I thought to myself the time to strike was nearly upon me, and in my pocket I could feel my weapons. I thought to myself about the other assignment that I had taken before as well, and specifically remembered 2 other houses where I had entered into and gotten away with what I'd done. They were both single-member houses and surprisingly easy, but something about this was different. I looked around the house and all I could feel was warmth and love. I was about to end that and replace it with cold and bitterness, and I looked at the old man who was continuously facing away from me. Could I really go through with this? I had the scene playing in my head. The house would be one of the worst crime scenes the city had ever seen. The horrific scene that investigators would never see again with this brutality. The more time went by, the more and more I couldn't do it. My eyes got blurry and saturated in tears, and collapsed, saying I couldn't go through with it. Both of the elderlies came to help me and were worried about my state. I told them everything, showed them my weapon, and that I was sent there to end them. And that how, because I refused to do my job, there was someone parked a few streets down that was going to come and terminate me in their place for not cooperating with the job. I feared for my life, but decided to stay and fight for these people, and was resolved to write them a new destiny. The man walked up the sidewalk to the house. I had taken too long. He was pissed. He knew I had caved. I pointed out the window and said that the guy was coming for me. The old lady had told me to hide in the other room and that she would answer the door. The old man hid me in the room and just stood out of eyesight of the door when it opened. The last thing I remember before I woke up from this dream was the door knocking and the old lady opening the door. I had woken up crying in my bed. My tears had gotten soaked all over the pillow that I had to wash them later. I didn't know who these people were, but it unsettled me so much that I was in an unfamiliar house with unfamiliar people, and yet I had so much empathy for them. I was bursting in tears. After this dream, I went to the same medium again and asked him who these people were. I didn't actually tell him anything about the dream aside from the question. Who were the old people in my dream? Not even an old couple, just the old people. Without missing a beat, he replies, "They were your parents." I walked out after he said that. My heart was sitting somewhere below my stomach for the next several hours, and every time I thought about this dream for a long time, it still sinks when I think about it. It wasn't such a terrible dream, but I know in my heart that I would have done this if I had chosen that other path. I'd like to believe that this dream was showing me what would have happened to me had I chosen the other path. I have no idea, in all honesty, if that's true, but right now, the only form of consolence that I have about this experience is that I chose not to go through with what happened in the dream. I have the wonderful knowledge of knowing that I turned the dude down and have no worries about the alternate reality of mine, but it hurts a lot to know that it was a possibility, and to be honest, if that were the life I had, I have no regrets looking at it now and knowing that I would be dead before I was 27. I love my parents. When I was a little kid, we had a lovable mutt called Rex, who was quite large for his breed. He was so big that I could hop on his back and pretend to ride him like a horse. He was the epitome of kindness and had the most gentle temperament. One day, something extraordinary happened while I was playing with a football near a wall, and Rex was right by my side. I had set up 2 makeshift goalposts using brooms and was attempting to score by shooting the ball through them. As I successfully kicked the ball and scored the first goal, I couldn't believe my ears. I distinctly heard Rex say "goal" in a hilarious tone, almost as if he was celebrating with me. A mixture of disbelief and joy overwhelmed me, thinking it was just a coincidence or maybe a yawn that sounded like the word, and then I continued playing. To my astonishment, as I scored another goal, Rex repeated his comical "goal" cheer, and I was absolutely beside myself with excitement and couldn't wait to share this incredible moment with my mum. Bursting with enthusiasm, I ran to tell her and excitedly relayed what had happened. However, instead of sharing in my excitement, she erupted into uncontrollable laughter. The rest of my family too found the idea of a talking dog hilarious. I found myself in a situation where no one believed me. Even though my claims were met with skepticism, I cherished that unique memory with Rex and the laughter. It brought a happiness to me. I want to start by saying that I'm a 21-year-old male from Canada. I have chronic insomnia, and have had since I was 8 or 9. That's when my lucid nightmares began. I call them lucid nightmares because it was almost like a lucid dream, but I can't control too much aside from myself, and the fact that I have very vivid, unrealistic dreams to the point where if I get hit in the dream, I'll wake up with a bruise or a mark, sometimes bleeding, like I was in my nightmare. I know this sounds like a lot of BS, but I've got no reason to lie. I've had sleep tests done, and I've tried lots of different sleeping medication, and none of them seems to make it stop, or even lessen it at all. My doctor has no idea, neither does my dad, or any of the sleep technicians. I've had many sleep tests done. They say it's in my head, but can't explain why the physical harm is there when I wake up. It starts with me waking up in this wooded area like a forest, but way more than trees than what normal forests are like, and it's dark and I can barely see. I also don't have my glasses, which is odd. I normally need them, but here I don't. I can see very well, and I hear a scream and I get scared, so I start waking up and looking around, and then I hear it. My dad's calling for me, and he sounds confused and scared, which is unlike him. He's 6'4", covered in tattoos, and doesn't take anything from anyone. It's weird to hear him distressed. I head in the direction of his voice and find this thing. I don't really know how to describe it, standing at around 5'11", but on 4 feet and not bipedal. It was white and looked kind of scary like an iguana, and it was very humanoid, but backward, so its back was where its stomach would be, and it was hunched over like it was a crab walking. Most terrifyingly is that it was mimicking the voices of people I knew, and it had no face, just blank, but I could tell it was looking at me. Well, at least my direction. That's when it just ran, and I mean faster than I had ever seen anything move, let alone something that looks like it shouldn't be able to move that quickly. As it moves, it screams like it's in pain. It is the most awful sound I've ever heard. Writing this now, I can still hear it. It gives me chills and makes me wish I could forget that god-awful sound. My dream does not have a happy ending. It did catch me, and this thing began cutting me with human-like nails and screeched. Then, these weird-looking flying things about the size of a wine glass come out of where its face should be, and they start to consume me. And as I perish, I wake up sore, covered in bug bites, and my dad was trying to wake me because he needed me to watch the dogs while he went to look at a place. That was a week ago now. I've barely slept and have been working to keep me going crazy. I'm freaking out. No one believes me. But when I tell my dad, he thinks I'm mad. Honestly, I don't blame him. Just typing this all out and reading it feels crazy. They aren't spider bites. The doctors say they don't look like that. And the burns, it feels like I was burned. I have an appointment tomorrow to see what they make of it, and I will update you if you want. As unreal as it sounds, this is one of my nightmares. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, and I'm eager to see what they say. But until now, I don't know what the hell is making this happen.